The Merovingians were a dynasty of Frankish kings who ruled large parts of what is now France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Western Germany from the 5th to the 8th century. They are often called the long-haired kings because their hair was a symbol of royal authority. Cut it, and a king lost his legitimacy. The dynasty is said to have been founded by Merovec, a semi-legendary figure whose origins are shrouded in myth. Some chroniclers claim his bloodline was touched by divine or even supernatural forces, giving the Merovingians a mystical aurora that later inspired legends about secret knowledge and sacred bloodlines. Their most famous ruler, Clovis I, united the Frankish tribes and converted to Christianity, laying the foundation for the Frankish kingdom and eventually modern France. The Merovingians were known for their powerful yet often unstable rule, marked by intrigue, family feuds, and struggles with the church. Over time, their political power waned, and the Carolingians, their former mayors of the palace, took control. But the Merovingians didn't completely vanish from history. Their mysterious bloodline and legends continued to capture imaginations, inspiring stories about hidden dynasties, secret knowledge, and even connections to the Holy Grail. In short, the Merovingians were more than kings. They were symbols of early medieval power, divine kingship, and the mysteries of a lost era.
Clovis I, the most famous Merovingian king, is often called the founder of the Frankish kingdom. Born around 466 AD, he inherited a small Frankish territory, but he had ambition far greater than his lands. Through brilliant military strategy, ruthless political moves, and clever alliances, Clovis began uniting the fragmented Frankish tribes into one powerful kingdom. Unlike many kings of his time, Clovis wasn't just a warrior, he was a visionary leader. His victories over rival tribes and Roman remnants expanded his realm across much of modern-day France and beyond. But Clovis's rise wasn't only about battles. He understood the power of religion. His conversion to Catholic Christianity in 496 AD gave him the support of the church and helped legitimize his rule over a population that was divided between pagan and Christian communities. Clovis's unification of the Frankish tribes set the foundation for centuries of European history, turning the Merovingian dynasty into a major force and laying the groundwork for what would eventually become modern France. In short, Clovis I wasn't just a king, he was the man who transformed scattered tribes into a united kingdom, blending force, faith, and political genius.
The Merovingians were more than just rulers. They were kings shrouded in mystery. Legends claim that their bloodline was touched by the divine, giving them a special, almost supernatural right to rule. Some medieval texts suggest that Merovec, the dynasty's founder, was born of a mysterious union, possibly between a human and a sea creature, or, according to some myths, a descendant of angels. This idea of sacred blood wasn't just superstition, it gave the Merovingians a sense of untouchable legitimacy. Their famously long hair wasn't merely a style, it was a symbol of divine authority, an outward sign that the king carried a sacred power within him. Cut it, and he lost not just his crown, but his right to rule. Over the centuries, this aura of mystery grew. Writers and conspiracy theorists later claimed that the Merovingian bloodline was connected to secret knowledge, hidden treasures, and even the Holy Grail. Some even speculate that remnants of this divine blood survive today, carried secretly through hidden lineages. In short, the Merovingians weren't just kings, they were seen as divinely chosen rulers, their mysterious bloodline fueling myths, legends, and centuries of fascination.
The Merovingian dynasty has long fascinated historians, mystics, and conspiracy theorists alike, not just because of their political power, but because of the mysterious aura surrounding their bloodline. From the very beginning, the origins of the dynasty were steeped in myth. Its founder, Merovec, was said to have a lineage that was far from ordinary. Some medieval sources suggest that Merovec was the offspring of a human mother and a sea creature, a creature sometimes described as a quinator, blending human and supernatural blood. Other versions claim that he descended from angels, tying the Merovingians to divine or supernatural forces. This claim of sacred ancestry was more than legend. It shaped how the Merovingians were perceived by their subjects. Their bloodline was considered inherently powerful, almost like a living link between the mortal and the divine. The idea was that they were chosen by higher powers to rule, and that their authority was natural, unquestionable, and eternal. This mystical aura extended to their physical appearance. The Merovingian kings were famous for their long hair, which was never cut except under extraordinary circumstances. Long hair wasn't a fashion statement, it was a symbol of their divine right to rule. Cutting a king's hair was tantamount to cutting off his legitimacy. It was believed that without his sacred hair, a king lost his power, his protection, and his connection to the divine. Over time, these beliefs gave rise to even more elaborate myths. Writers centuries later suggested that the Merovingians were not only kings, but guardians of secret knowledge, wisdom passed down through their sacred blood. Some claim that this knowledge included hidden treasures, ancient rituals, or even secrets about the origins of humanity itself. In modern times, the idea of a divine Merovingian bloodline became linked to conspiracy theories involving the Holy Grail, secret societies, and hidden descendants. These stories suggest that fragments of the Merovingian line may still survive in secret, influencing events behind the scenes, though such claims are impossible to verify. What makes the Merovingians so compelling is that their legend and history are intertwined. Even if we strip away the myths, the dynasty's reputation for power, ritual, and sacred kingship is undeniable. Their very existence blurred the line between history and legend, giving rise to the idea that some bloodlines carry more than just genes. They carry mystery, authority, and perhaps even divine favor.
While the Merovingian kings often take the spotlight in history, the queens and royal women of the dynasty wielded enormous influence, shaping politics, succession, and even the fate of entire kingdoms. Far from being mere decorative figures, these women were strategists, power brokers, and sometimes ruthless players in the turbulent world of early medieval Europe. One of the most famous Merovingian queens was Clotilde, the Burgundian princess who married Clovis I. She is remembered not only for her piety, but for her crucial role in Clovis's conversion to Christianity. According to historical accounts, Clotilde urged Clovis to abandon paganism and embrace Catholic Christianity, a decision that reshaped the Frankish kingdom and secured the support of the Church. Her influence demonstrates that Merovingian queens could shape the spiritual and political destiny of the realm, wielding a subtle but profound power behind the throne. Beyond Clotilde, other queens and royal women were known for their political maneuvering. Some acted as regents for young kings, effectively ruling entire territories in their sons' names. In other cases, royal women married into other kingdoms to forge alliances, creating bonds that could prevent wars or consolidate power. Their marriages were not just family matters, they were strategic tools, sometimes more important than armies or treaties. However, the Merovingian court was also a dangerous place. Queens had to navigate intrigues, rivalries, and plots, both from ambitious nobles and sometimes even their own family members. Several queens are noted in historical texts for orchestrating assassinations or political coups to protect their children's claim to the throne. For example, Fredegund, one of the most infamous Merovingian queens, was known for her ruthless ambition.
She maneuvered to secure her son's position on the throne and allegedly eliminated rivals with shocking cunning, showing that Merovingian women could be as formidable as the kings themselves. Royal women also played a role in cultural and religious life. They sponsored monasteries, churches, and charitable works, which strengthened their influence both socially and spiritually. By aligning themselves with the church, queens like Clotilde and others reinforced their family's divine legitimacy, echoing the mystical claims surrounding the Merovingian bloodline. In essence, Merovingian queens and royal women were far more than bystanders in history. They were guardians of dynastic power, influencers of religion and politics, and sometimes the hidden architects of the kingdom's survival. Their stories reveal a world where power was not confined to the throne, and where women could wield influence with intelligence, strategy, and, when necessary, ruthless determination.
One of the most striking and mysterious aspects of the Merovingian dynasty was their long hair, which became a defining symbol of their kingship. Unlike most rulers of the time, whose crowns or armor signified authority, the Merovingians wore their power literally on their heads. Long hair wasn't merely a fashion choice, it was a sacred emblem of royal and divine authority. The symbolism of long hair in Merovingian culture went beyond vanity or personal style. It was believed that the king's hair was a physical manifestation of his sacred power. Cut a Merovingian king's hair, and he lost not only his beauty, but also his right to rule. Chroniclers describe the act of cutting a king's hair as a way to depose him, turning a once powerful monarch into a powerless figure. In essence, the hair acted as a crown that could not be forged or stolen, linking the king directly to divine favor. This symbolism extended into the mystique of the dynasty's bloodline. The Merovingian kings were said to possess a sacred or semi-divine nature, and their hair was considered a visible sign of this extraordinary heritage. Legends suggest that the power of their blood and their long hair were intertwined. Both marked them as chosen rulers set apart from ordinary men. The long hair also had political and social significance. It visually distinguished the king from nobles and warriors, creating an aura of majesty and otherworldliness. It reinforced his untouchable status and reminded both subjects and rivals that the king's authority was rooted not just in conquest or inheritance, but in a mystical right to rule. Interestingly, the importance of hair extended into rituals and ceremonies. Some sources suggest that hair was never cut except in moments of disgrace or deposition. When a Merovingian king was dethroned, cutting his hair symbolized the removal of divine authority and the end of his rule. This act was a powerful visual representation of political change, demonstrating that true kingship was inseparable from sacred symbolism. The legacy of the long-haired kings goes beyond mere history. Their image has endured in legend, art, and even modern conspiracy theories, where the long-haired Merovingian represents secret power, divine lineage, and hidden authority. It is one of the dynasty's most compelling symbols, a simple physical trait imbued with mystery, power, and spiritual significance. In summary, the Merovingians' long hair was far more than a hairstyle. It was a living emblem of kingship, a visual declaration of sacred authority, and a tangible connection to the divine. It separated kings from mortals, legitimized their rule, and cemented their place in history as rulers whose power was both worldly and otherworldly.
One of the most fascinating and influential aspects of the Merovingian dynasty was their system of succession, governed by the so-called Salic Law. Unlike later European monarchies, which often followed strict primogeniture, the firstborn inherits everything, the Merovingians practiced a system that was both complex and potentially chaotic, with deep consequences for their kingdom and for European history. The Salic Law was originally a legal code of the Salian Franks, a tribe within the larger Frankish confederation. It covered criminal law, property rights, and inheritance rules. Crucially for the Merovingians, it excluded women from inheriting the throne. While women could wield enormous influence behind the scenes, through marriage, regency, or council, they could not become ruling queens in their own right. This exclusion was not just a social rule, but a legal principle, deeply entwined with the dynasty's conception of sacred kingship and the continuity of the Merovingian bloodline. In practice, Salic law had dramatic effects on succession. When a king died, his realm was typically divided among his sons, rather than passing intact to a single heir. This often led to fragmentation of power and bitter rivalries within the royal family. Brothers could wage war against one another, alliances could shift overnight, and entire regions of the Frankish kingdom could change hands with the death of a single ruler. The Merovingian period is full of such conflicts, brothers and cousins plotting, fighting, or assassinating each other to secure their share of the kingdom. Despite its potential for chaos, this system also had strategic advantages. Dividing the kingdom among multiple heirs prevented any single ruler from becoming too powerful too quickly, keeping the balance among the Frankish tribes. It also reinforced the idea that the Merovingian kingship was not simply a personal inheritance, but a shared, sacred trust of the bloodline. Each son carried the divine authority of the Merovingian lineage, and the kingdom itself was seen as a collection of sacred territories, each ruled by a scion of the bloodline. Salic law also played a crucial role in shaping later European monarchies. By excluding women from the throne, it became the foundation for disputes over succession for centuries, influencing French royal inheritance laws, the 100 Years' War, and beyond. The Merovingians' approach to succession, combined with the mystical aura surrounding their bloodline, created a unique blend of law, tradition, and legend that set them apart from other dynasties of their time. In essence, the Salic law and Merovingian succession were not just legal mechanisms. They were expressions of the dynasty's identity, intertwining family, bloodline, sacred kingship, and political strategy. They reveal a society where power, legitimacy, and divine authority were inseparable, and where the fate of a kingdom could hinge on the rules of inheritance as much as on the sword.
At its height, the Merovingian dynasty ruled over a vast and diverse territory that would eventually form the backbone of modern France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and parts of Western Germany. Yet the kingdom was far from a unified, centralized state. It was a patchwork of tribes, regions, and cities, held together by the authority of the king, the loyalty of nobles, and the shared culture of the Franks. The Merovingians inherited much of their territory from the earlier Roman and Germanic traditions. They retained Roman administrative practices in cities, while also respecting traditional tribal structures in rural areas. This blend of Roman order and Frankish custom allowed them to maintain control over a vast and culturally diverse population. But it also created tensions between central authority and local autonomy. Under Merovingian rule, the kingdom was often divided among sons, following the principles of Salic law. This meant that power was fragmented into multiple regions, each ruled by a king or sub-king, creating both cooperation and rivalry within the dynasty. For example, one king might control Neustria, another Austrasia, and a third Burgundy. These divisions could lead to instability as brothers or cousins fought for dominance, yet they also allowed the Merovingians to project their influence across a wide territory without overextending a single ruler. Despite internal divisions, the Merovingians were adept at expanding their kingdom through military conquest, diplomacy, and strategic marriages.
They absorbed neighboring tribes and territories, often incorporating local customs and elites into their administration. This helped the Franks to blend diverse peoples into a broader political entity, strengthening their legitimacy and stabilizing their rule. Religion played a crucial role in consolidating power. Early Merovingian kings often combined pagan rituals with Christian practices, gradually transitioning their realm towards full Christianity. The conversion of Clovis I, for example, was not only a spiritual decision but a political masterstroke, as it secured the support of the Church and aligned the Frankish kingdom with powerful Christian neighbors. Monasteries and churches became centers of both faith and governance, reinforcing royal authority and cultural cohesion across the kingdom. Economically, the kingdom relied on agriculture, trade, and tribute from conquered lands. Towns and cities served as hubs for crafts, markets, and administration, while the countryside produced food and manpower for armies. The Merovingians also issued coins and maintained legal codes, such as the Salic Law, to ensure social order and continuity of governance. Life under the Merovingians was a mix of military might, political intrigue, and cultural blending. The kings were warriors, lawmakers, and religious patrons, balancing the needs of their nobles, clergy, and subjects. While the kingdom was never perfectly unified, the Merovingians established a framework that would influence European governance for centuries. Their rule laid the foundations for the Carolingian dynasty and the rise of medieval France, proving that even a fragmented and tribal society could evolve into a formidable political entity under strong leadership. In essence, the Frankish kingdom under Merovingian rule was a dynamic and often turbulent realm defined by a mix of tradition, conquest, religion, and dynastic power. It was a kingdom where the king's authority was sacred, yet constantly negotiated with powerful nobles, ambitious heirs, and the ever-present forces of history.
Despite centuries of rule, the Merovingian dynasty eventually lost real political authority, even while kings still wore crowns and retained symbolic power. This decline was gradual, caused by a combination of internal fragmentation, weak rulers, and the rise of powerful officials, and it ultimately paved the way for the Carolingians to take control. A key factor in the decline was the practice of dividing the kingdom among sons, a tradition rooted in Salic law. While this system ensured that each royal son received a share of the realm, it also fragmented power, often creating rivalries and civil wars. The Merovingian kings were forced to spend much of their reign defending their territories from relatives rather than expanding or strengthening their authority. Over time, this constant division made it easier for ambitious nobles to challenge or manipulate the monarchy. Another factor was the rise of the mayors of the palace, originally high-ranking officials who managed the royal household and administration. As Merovingian kings became weaker or more passive, these officials began to wield real political and military power. By the 7th and 8th centuries, the kings were often referred to as rois fainéants or do-nothing kings, with the mayors of the palace effectively running the kingdom. The Merovingians retained their titles, ceremonial duties, and symbolic long hair, but the actual governance had shifted to their subordinates. Religious and social changes also contributed to the decline. The Merovingians had long relied on the church to legitimize their rule, but as the dynasty weakened, bishops and abbots became independent power brokers. They often supported rival claimants or powerful nobles, further undermining royal authority. At the same time, the kingdom faced external pressures from neighboring tribes and emerging powers, requiring decisive leadership that the later Merovingian kings increasingly failed to provide. The final blow came in 751 AD, when the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, was deposed by Pepin the Short, the mayor of the palace. Pepin secured the support of the Pope to legitimize the transfer of power, marking the official end of Merovingian rule and the beginning of the Carolingian dynasty.
Symbolically, Childeric's long hair was cut, demonstrating that the sacred authority of the Merovingians had finally been removed and the era of true Merovingian power was over. Yet, despite this decline, the Merovingians were not forgotten. Their legendary bloodline, sacred kingship, and long-haired symbolism endured in myths, conspiracy theories, and later historical imagination. Even after losing political control, the dynasty left an indelible mark on European history, influencing succession practices, law, and the cultural understanding of monarchy for centuries. In conclusion, the decline of Merovingian political power was not sudden, but a slow erosion driven by dynastic fragmentation, weak rulers, ambitious officials, and changing social and religious dynamics. The dynasty's symbolic power persisted, but the reality of governance had shifted, showing that even the most sacred of kings can be overshadowed by the mechanisms of administration and the ambitions of those around them.
Life in Merovingian Gaul was a complex mix of tradition, survival, and gradual cultural change. Shaped by the legacy of the Roman Empire, the tribal structure of the Franks, and the evolving influence of Christianity. Unlike the dramatic battles and political intrigue that dominate history books, daily life for most people was grounded in farming, family, and local community, though the shadow of kings, nobles, and warriors was never far away. The majority of the population were peasants and small farmers who worked the land to produce food for themselves, their villages, and the local elites. They cultivated grains such as wheat, barley, and rye, while raising livestock like pigs, cattle, and sheep. Farming was labor-intensive and seasonal, with families working from dawn until dusk. The success of a harvest determined not just survival, but also the ability to pay taxes or tribute to local lords, which could be in the form of grain, animals, or labor. Villages were small and tightly knit, often organized around a central hall, church, or marketplace. Homes were simple, usually built of wood, wattle, and daub, with thatched roofs and a single hearth providing heat and cooking. Wealthier families, particularly minor nobles, might have larger stone homes, but even they lacked many comforts we associate with later medieval castles. Life was communal. Neighbors shared labor, protection and resources, and festivals or religious observances were central to social cohesion. Religion was a significant part of everyday life. In the early Merovingian period, pagan practices still lingered, but by the 6th and 7th centuries, Christianity had spread widely, especially after Clovis I's conversion. The church influenced education, morality, and justice, and monasteries often served as centers of learning and refuge. Religious festivals marked the rhythm of the year, and local priests or monks could wield surprising influence over daily decisions. Crafts and trades were also important. Blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, and potters provided essential goods, often working in small workshops or at home. Markets allowed peasants and townsfolk to trade surplus goods, sometimes traveling long distances to exchange grain, textiles, and metalwork. While most people were tied to the land, a growing number of artisans and merchants contributed to emerging urban centers, particularly in former Roman cities like Paris, Reims, and Soissons. For the nobility, daily life was markedly different. Kings, queens, and high-ranking nobles spent much of their time managing estates, waging war, and negotiating alliances. Their courts were centers of power and culture, where politics, feasting, and ceremonial display were intertwined. Nobles relied on peasants and lesser warriors to maintain their wealth and military strength, reinforcing a rigid social hierarchy that structured everyday life across the kingdom. Life in Merovingian Gaul was hard and precarious. Disease, poor harvests, and conflict were constant threats. Yet it was also a world rich with tradition, ritual, and community. People took pride in their villages, families, and local customs, even as the kings and distant palaces shaped the larger destiny of the realm. The combination of Roman legacy,
Frankish tribal structure, and emerging Christian culture created a society that was resilient, adaptive, and deeply influential for the centuries that followed. In essence, daily life in Merovingian Gaul was a balancing act between survival, devotion, work, and social obligations, framed by a kingdom in transition, a world where ordinary lives intersected with the extraordinary legacies of kings, queens, and sacred bloodlines.
Merovingian art and jewelry were far more than decoration. They were expressions of identity, wealth, and sacred authority, reflecting the complex world of early medieval Europe. For the Merovingians, objects were not merely ornamental. They communicated status, legitimacy, and the mystical aura of the royal bloodline. The Merovingians inherited much from the late Roman artistic tradition, but they also incorporated Germanic tribal aesthetics, resulting in a unique style that emphasized intricate patterns, symbolic motifs, and the display of power through personal adornment. Jewelry was perhaps the most visible and meaningful of these objects. Kings, queens, and nobles adorned themselves with brooches, fibulae, necklaces, rings, and diadems, often crafted from gold, silver, and precious stones. The designs were elaborate, featuring interwoven animal forms, geometric patterns, and Christian symbols, each conveying a message about the wearer's status, divine favor, or political authority. For Merovingian kings, jewelry and regalia were extensions of their sacred kingship. Crowns and diadems, often richly decorated, symbolized not only earthly power, but also a connection to divine authority, reinforcing the idea that the king's legitimacy was sanctioned by higher forces. Even the long hair of the kings, already a powerful symbol, was often complemented by jeweled clasps and ornaments that visually reinforced their sacred status. Merovingian art was also expressed through manuscripts, metalwork, and funerary objects. Illuminated religious texts, ceremonial chalices, and intricately decorated weapons served dual purposes. They were both functional and markers of elite identity. Burial goods in particular were striking. Kings and high nobles were interred with gold and garnet brooches, elaborate belt buckles, and symbolic amulets, each piece a testament to the wearer's power and connections in life and in death. Interestingly, many Merovingian designs carried hidden meanings or protective symbolism. Animals like eagles, lions, and serpents could represent courage, vigilance, or divine protection. Christian symbols began appearing more frequently as the dynasty embraced Christianity, blending spiritual authority with royal grandeur. This combination of artistry and symbolism created objects that were both beautiful and politically potent, serving as tools of influence as much as personal decoration. Merovingian art and jewelry also functioned in diplomatic and social contexts. Exchanging gifts or presenting lavish objects at court reinforced alliances, rewarded loyalty, or displayed dominance over rivals. In this way, material culture became an essential part of statecraft, intertwined with the dynasty's reputation for sacred authority and mystical lineage. In essence, Merovingian art and jewelry were not mere luxury. They were a language of power. Every clasp, gem, or engraved pattern communicated wealth, divine favor, and social rank, reinforcing the hierarchy of the kingdom. They provide modern historians and archaeologists with a glimpse into a world where material objects carried the weight of kingship, bloodline, and spiritual authority, making them central to the identity and enduring legacy of the Merovingian dynasty. The Merovingian period was a fascinating era of religious transition, where the old pagan traditions of the Franks intersected and often clashed with the spread of Christianity. This duality shaped not only politics and culture, but also daily life, social norms, and the symbolic power of kingship. Before Clovis I's conversion to Christianity in 496 AD, the Franks practiced a variety of pagan beliefs rooted in Germanic tribal traditions. These included the worship of gods such as Wodan or Odin, Thunor or Thor, and Ti or Tyr, along with spirits associated with rivers, forests, and household hearths. Rituals often involved sacrifices, feasting, and ceremonies tied to seasonal cycles, aimed at ensuring fertility, protection in battle, and prosperity for the tribe. Sacred groves, rivers, and trees held spiritual significance, and religious leaders like priests or seers wielded considerable influence in guiding tribal decisions and maintaining divine favor. When Clovis I converted to Catholic Christianity, it marked a pivotal shift. His baptism in Reims not only symbolized his personal faith, but also served as a strategic political act, aligning the Frankish kingdom with the powerful church and establishing legitimacy among Christian neighbors. The church, in turn, used this alliance to expand its influence in Merovingian Gaul, building monasteries, churches, and schools that became centers of religious and cultural authority. However, the transition was gradual and uneven. Pagan beliefs did not disappear overnight. In rural areas, many people continued traditional rituals and maintained respect for local spirits. Even the kings sometimes blended pagan customs with Christian practices, using rituals and symbols from both religions to assert sacred authority. For instance, the long hair of Merovingian kings, already a symbol of divine power, could be understood in both pagan and Christian contexts, linking the ruler to both ancestral and divine legitimacy. This blending of traditions is evident in art, architecture, and ceremonial life. Jewelry and metalwork often combined Christian crosses with animal motifs, reflecting the coexistence of old and new belief systems. Burial practices also illustrate this hybrid culture. Graves might include both Christian symbols and objects with pagan significance, demonstrating how the living sought to navigate the spiritual world while maintaining continuity with ancestral customs. The interaction of paganism and Christianity also shaped law and governance. Many Merovingian legal codes retained elements of tribal custom alongside Christian moral precepts. Kings acted as both secular rulers and sacred intermediaries, blending the old Germanic concept of tribal leadership with the Christian idea of divinely sanctioned authority. This duality helped stabilize society during a period of cultural and political change, even as tensions occasionally erupted between adherents of the two faiths. In essence, Merovingian Gaul was a religiously dynamic landscape where pagan traditions and Christianity coexisted, competed, and gradually merged. The dynasty's ability to navigate this spiritual complexity, embracing Christianity while acknowledging older beliefs, was central to their political strategy, cultural influence, and enduring mystique. It is this blend of the sacred and the ancestral that helped define the Merovingians as both historical rulers and legendary kings, a dynasty rooted in both earth and divine authority.
During the Merovingian era, monasteries became powerful centers of religion, culture, and politics, playing a crucial role in the spread of Christianity throughout the Frankish kingdom.
Monastic life was not just about devotion, it was a tool for consolidating power, preserving knowledge, and influencing society at every level. Monks and nuns lived according to strict rules, the most famous being the Rule of Saint Benedict, which emphasized prayer, work, in communal living. Daily life in a monastery was regimented. Monks would rise before dawn for vigils and prayers, spend much of the day tending to crops, copying manuscripts, or crafting religious objects, and conclude the day with evening prayers. These routines were not only acts of devotion, but also a way to maintain order, discipline, and spiritual focus, qualities that reflected the broader social order the Merovingians sought to establish in their kingdom. Monasteries also became hubs of learning and literacy. While most of the population could not read or write, monks meticulously copied religious texts, legal codes, and classical works from the Roman past. In doing so, they preserved knowledge that would otherwise have been lost, serving as the intellectual backbone of the kingdom. Some monasteries even trained scribes and administrators, producing men capable of managing estates, drafting legal documents, and advising rulers, effectively linking religious devotion with governance. Beyond education, monasteries had a profound social and political impact. They acted as centers of charity, providing food, shelter, and care for the poor, sick, and travelers. By doing so, they strengthened the church's influence among the population and reinforced the legitimacy of Christian kingship. Many Merovingian rulers generously supported monasteries, granting them land, wealth, and privileges. These endowments were not only acts of piety, they were strategic investments, aligning the dynasty with the growing power of the church and ensuring spiritual legitimacy for their reign. Monastic communities were also deeply involved in missionary work, helping convert pagan populations in rural regions. Monks would travel to remote villages, preaching, baptizing, and establishing small religious outposts that eventually grew into churches and monasteries. This missionary activity was critical in creating a unified Christian identity across the diverse and often fragmented Frankish territories. Interestingly, monastic life could also be a path to power for women. Noblewomen sometimes founded or led convents, using these religious institutions to exert influence over politics, culture, and spiritual life. Figures like Saint Radegund, a Merovingian queen who became a nun, exemplify how religious devotion and political influence were often intertwined in this period. In essence, monasteries during the Merovingian era were more than spiritual retreats. They were engines of cultural transformation, political consolidation, and social stability. They helped spread Christianity, preserve knowledge, support the poor, and strengthen the authority of the Merovingian kings. The combination of spiritual devotion and practical utility made monastic life a cornerstone of Merovingian society, leaving a legacy that shaped medieval Europe for centuries to come.
The Merovingian dynasty ruled during a turbulent period when war and conquest were central to political survival. Military strength was not optional, it was a defining feature of kingship. The Merovingians were warriors as much as they were rulers, and their armies were a combination of tribal levies, professional warriors, and feudal retinues, organized to respond to both internal rebellions and external threats. At the heart of the Merovingian military system was the king himself, who led campaigns personally. Kings were expected to inspire loyalty, courage, and discipline among their warriors, demonstrating both martial skill and divine favor. Battles were as much about ritual and symbolism as they were about strategy. A victorious king was seen as favored by the gods or God, reinforcing the sacred nature of Merovingian rule. The army was largely composed of Frankish warriors who owed loyalty to the king in exchange for land, plunder, or prestige. Noblemen brought their own retinues, creating a structure where the king commanded a coalition of semi-independent forces. This system fostered both unity and tension, as ambitious noblemen could use their military power to challenge the king or seize territory. Cavalry began to gain importance, with heavily armed horsemen playing a decisive role in battles, while infantry formed the backbone of the army, often armed with spears, axes, and shields. Fortifications and castles were limited but strategically important. Early Merovingian strongholds were typically wooden palisades or earthwork forts designed to protect key towns, monasteries, or river crossings. These defensive structures allowed the Merovingians to maintain control over their fragmented territories, providing safe havens during rebellions or invasions. Tactics were influenced by both Germanic and Roman traditions. The Merovingians retained some Roman methods of organization and discipline, but warfare was still brutal, personal, and fast-moving. Raids, ambushes, and cavalry charges were common, and victories were often cemented by plunder and tribute, which in turn funded future campaigns. Warfare was also intertwined with politics and succession. Rival Merovingian kings, brothers or cousins, frequently fought for dominance, and control of the military often determined who would claim the throne. The army was not just a defensive force, it was a tool for consolidating power, enforcing Salic law, and expanding influence. Religion played a role on the battlefield as well. Priests or bishops might accompany armies, blessing warriors and invoking divine protection. Victory in battle was seen as a sign of God's favor, reinforcing the perception that Merovingian kings were not only political leaders, but divinely sanctioned rulers. In essence, Merovingian warfare was a combination of tribal loyalty, personal valor, and emerging organizational sophistication. The army reflected the structure of the kingdom itself, decentralized, dynamic, and reliant on both martial skill and sacred legitimacy. The military system allowed the Merovingians to expand their realm, defend against rivals, and maintain the aura of sacred kingship, leaving a lasting imprint on the development of medieval European warfare.
The Merovingian dynasty ruled over a diverse and evolving economy, shaped by the remnants of the Roman world, tribal traditions, and the expansion of trade networks across early medieval Europe. Coins and currency were central to this system, serving not only as a medium of exchange, but also as a symbol of royal authority and legitimacy. Merovingian coinage evolved from Roman prototypes, reflecting both practical needs and the king's power. Early coins were typically silver, carefully weighed, and stamped with designs that identified the ruler and sometimes the mint. By circulating coins, the Merovingians were able to assert their authority over a wide territory, ensuring that economic activity reinforced political control. In essence, every coin bore the mark of kingship, linking commerce with royal legitimacy. Economically, Merovingian society was primarily agrarian. Most people lived in villages or small towns, farming the land to produce grains, vegetables, and livestock. Taxes and tributes were often collected in kind, grain, animals, or labor, but coins allowed for a more flexible and standardized system, especially in urban centers and marketplaces. Merchants and artisans increasingly relied on coinage for trade, creating regional networks of commerce that extended beyond local villages. Trade was both local and long-distance. Markets in towns like Paris, Reims, and Soissons connected peasants, artisans, and nobles, while merchants exchanged goods such as textiles, salt, metalwork, and luxury items. Coins facilitated these exchanges, providing a stable measure of value and enabling the flow of wealth across the kingdom. Some coins even traveled far beyond Frankish borders, reaching Mediterranean and Northern European trade hubs, showing the Merovingians' integration into a larger economic world. Coins also carried symbolic and political meaning. Beyond their practical function, they often displayed the king's name, portrait, or emblem, asserting his authority wherever they circulated.
By controlling the minting of coins, the Merovingians could reinforce loyalty, legitimize rule, and project power even into remote regions of the kingdom. The economy was further supported by crafts, metallurgy, and artisan production. Blacksmiths, goldsmiths, potters, and weavers produced goods for local use, trade, and the nobility. Wealth was concentrated among the royal family, nobles, and church institutions, which also owned large tracts of land. These elites controlled the flow of resources, influencing both economic stability and political power. Despite these developments, the Merovingian economy faced challenges. Fragmented territories, regional rivalries, and frequent warfare disrupted trade and production. Agricultural productivity could fluctuate, leading to scarcity or famine, while political instability sometimes undermined confidence in currency. Yet the kingdom's coinage system and expanding networks of trade reflect a sophisticated understanding of economy, blending Roman heritage, Frankish custom, and emerging medieval practices. In essence, Merovingian coins and economy were deeply intertwined with kingship and power. Currency was not only a practical tool for trade, but a symbol of authority, legitimacy, and integration in a kingdom that was at once tribal, agrarian, and increasingly connected to the wider European world. The coins that circulated in Merovingian Gaul were, in a way, tiny pieces of royal influence, reaching into every village, marketplace, and household.
The Merovingian kings did not just rule through armies, law, and religion. They also expressed their authority and prestige through architecture. While few structures from this era survive today, historical records and archaeological evidence reveal that Merovingian palaces and buildings were carefully designed to project power, accommodate governance, and reflect the sacred nature of kingship. Merovingian palaces were often constructed at strategic locations, along rivers, near major roads, or within fortified settlements. These sites allowed kings to control trade, administer justice, and respond quickly to threats, while also demonstrating dominance over the surrounding land. Palaces were more than residences. They were political centers, where nobles, clergy, and officials gathered to discuss governance, strategy, and diplomacy. The architecture itself combined Roman influence with Germanic traditions. Kings favored buildings made of stone or timber, often with large halls for audiences, feasts, and ceremonies. These halls were central to palace life, serving as spaces where the king could display his wealth, reward loyalty, and reinforce hierarchy. Some palaces included chapels, reflecting the growing influence of Christianity and the intertwining of spiritual and temporal authority. Decoration and ornamentation played a crucial role. Walls, columns, and doors might be adorned with intricate carvings, symbolic motifs, and metalwork, all designed to reflect the king's divine favor and royal status. Luxury materials like gold, silver, and colored stone were often reserved for areas where the king and his court would gather, emphasizing status, wealth, and sacred authority. Merovingian architecture also included fortifications, such as ramparts, towers, and palisades. These structures were both defensive and symbolic, signaling to enemies and subjects alike that the king commanded both power and protection. Even ceremonial gates or bridges could serve as reminders of royal authority, blending utility with display. Interestingly, many Merovingian palaces were part of larger royal estates, which included farmland, workshops, and sometimes monastic communities. This integration reflected the dual role of the king as both political ruler and economic manager, ensuring that his household and retinue were supplied while asserting control over the surrounding territory. The legacy of Merovingian architecture extends beyond mere buildings.
These structures embodied the identity of the dynasty, merging Roman urban sophistication with tribal symbolism and Christian sanctity. They were spaces where power, ritual, and governance intersected, reinforcing the sacred kingship that defined the Merovingian era. In essence, the architecture and palaces of Merovingian kings were more than functional spaces. They were instruments of authority, designed to inspire awe, consolidate power, and symbolize the union of divine favor, political control, and cultural sophistication. Through these structures, the Merovingians communicated a message that extended far beyond the walls, that their rule was both earthly and sacred, practical and ceremonial, temporal and eternal.
Centuries after the Merovingians ceased to rule, their dynasty became the subject of myth, legend, and conspiracy theories, largely focused on the idea of a secret bloodline that survived in hiding. These theories portray the Merovingians not just as historical kings, but as keepers of forbidden knowledge, sacred lineage, and hidden power, capturing imaginations from medieval times to modern pop culture. The roots of these conspiracies lie in the mystique of the dynasty. The Merovingians were known as the long-haired kings, with their hair symbolizing sacred authority. Combined with legends about their semi-divine ancestry, claims that their bloodline descended from angels or mystical beings, this created fertile ground for stories suggesting that their descendants continued to wield hidden influence. In modern times, writers and theorists have expanded these ideas. Some claim that the Merovingians were connected to the Holy Grail, proposing that the Grail represents a metaphorical or literal continuation of their bloodline. Others suggest that the dynasty's descendants intermarried with European nobility, creating secretive elite families who manipulated politics and religion from behind the scenes. These ideas are often linked to organizations like the Priory of Sion, the Knights Templar, and other legendary secret societies. Many conspiracy theories focus on hidden knowledge and spiritual power. The Merovingians are portrayed as guardians of ancient wisdom, possessing secrets about sacred geometry, alchemy, or lost religious texts. Their bloodline is sometimes described as a vessel for divine or mystical energy, a concept that feeds both fascination and speculation about their lasting influence. While historians consider most of these claims unsubstantiated, the persistence of the Merovingian myth demonstrates the dynasty's enduring cultural impact. Books, films, and documentaries often explore these ideas, portraying the Merovingians as a bridge between historical reality and mystical legend, blurring the line between fact and fiction. Interestingly, the conspiracy surrounding the Merovingian bloodline reflects deeper human concerns, the allure of hidden power, the fascination with secret knowledge, and the desire to believe that history contains mysteries yet to be uncovered. By linking royal ancestry, sacred blood, and clandestine influence, these theories reinforce the image of the Merovingians as both rulers and symbols, extending their legacy far beyond their actual reign. In essence, the Merovingian bloodline in conspiracy theories transforms the dynasty from a historical ruling family into a mythic archetype, representing hidden authority, divine favor, and eternal intrigue. Even today, these stories capture the imagination, reminding us that the Merovingians are as much a legend as a historical reality, a dynasty whose mysteries continue to inspire curiosity, speculation, and fascination.
The Merovingian dynasty is deeply intertwined with one of the most enduring legends in Western culture, the Holy Grail. While the Grail is traditionally thought of as the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper, medieval and modern stories often link it to the Merovingians in ways that blend history, mysticism, and conspiracy. The connection begins with the Merovingians' mysterious bloodline,
Legends claimed that the dynasty descended from a sacred or semi-divine lineage, sometimes described as the offspring of angels or mystical beings. Some theorists and storytellers argue that the Holy Grail is not a physical cup at all, but a symbol of this sacred bloodline, a vessel through which divine power or secret knowledge is preserved. In this interpretation, the Grail represents the continuation of Merovingian blood and legitimacy, hidden from the world to protect its mystical potential. Medieval romances and later literature often depict the Grail as both a spiritual object and a political symbol. By linking it to the Merovingians, authors created a narrative in which the dynasty was not merely a historical ruling family, but a guardian of hidden truth, whose descendants were said to carry divine authority. Some legends even suggest that the Grail, or the bloodline it represents, was protected by secret societies such as the Knights Templar or the Priory of Sion, weaving the Merovingians into a network of sacred and clandestine guardianship. The Grail-Merovingian connection also highlights the dynasty's symbolic power. Just as the Merovingian kings were marked by long hair, sacred ancestry, and mystical authority, the Grail embodies the idea of legitimacy and divine favor. In some stories, retrieving or controlling the Grail is equivalent to claiming rightful authority, echoing the ancient Merovingian concept that kingship was not simply inherited or won by force, but granted by divine providence. Even today, the Merovingians' association with the Holy Grail persists in literature, films, and popular culture. Modern novels often portray the dynasty as the secret royal bloodline, whose descendants possess hidden knowledge, spiritual power, or the key to unlocking ancient mysteries. This fusion of history and legend has cemented the Merovingians' place not only in the chronicles of medieval Europe, but also in the mythic imagination of the modern world.
The Merovingian dynasty, with its long-haired kings and sacred bloodline, has inspired both historians and treasure hunters alike. Part of this fascination comes from the mystery surrounding their tombs and burial sites. Archaeological discoveries in recent centuries have begun to reveal the lives and afterlives of these enigmatic rulers, offering glimpses into their culture, wealth, and ritual practices. Merovingian tombs were often elaborate, especially for kings, queens, and high-ranking nobles. Archaeologists have uncovered graves rich with jewelry, weaponry, and ceremonial objects, reflecting the belief that these items would accompany the deceased in the afterlife. Gold and garnet brooches, ornate belt buckles, swords, and religious artifacts were common, demonstrating not only wealth and status, but also the symbolic power of the Merovingian bloodline. Burial sites were sometimes located within or near churches and monasteries, blending Christian rituals with older traditions that emphasized the sacredness of the royal body. Some tombs have been remarkably preserved, providing insight into royal lifestyle and artistry. The discovery of skeletal remains alongside precious objects allows scientists to study diet, health, and even the physical traits that characterized Merovingian kings and nobles. Long hair, once a symbol of divine authority, has occasionally been inferred from burial contexts and artifacts, reinforcing the enduring legends surrounding the dynasty. Intriguingly, many Merovingian tombs remain hidden or lost, fueling speculation and conspiracy theories. Stories abound of secret burial chambers, unmarked graves, and treasures that were intentionally concealed to protect the sacred bloodline. Some historians suggest that powerful families, monastic communities, or later rulers may have relocated or hidden royal remains to prevent desecration or to maintain control over dynastic claims. These legends tie into broader myths about the Merovingians' divine lineage and the supposed survival of their descendants.
Excavations in regions like Soissons, Saint-Denis, and the Loire Valley have uncovered important Merovingian burial sites, shedding light on funerary customs, religious syncretism, and social hierarchy. Graves reveal a mix of pagan and Christian influences. Items with symbolic meaning, religious artifacts, and remnants of rituals demonstrate how the Merovingians navigated the transition from tribal paganism to Christianity while maintaining a sense of sacred kingship. These archaeological discoveries do more than satisfy curiosity. They bridge history and legend, giving tangible evidence of a dynasty long shrouded in mystery. They reveal not only the material wealth of the Merovingians, but also the cultural, religious, and political significance of their burials, confirming why these kings and queens inspired both awe and fascination for centuries. In essence, hidden Merovingian tombs and archaeological finds are windows into a world where power, ritual, and mystique converged. They provide a rare glimpse of a dynasty that combined historical authority with legendary symbolism, preserving the legacy of sacred kingship, mysterious bloodlines, and cultural transformation for future generations.
One of the most enduring mysteries of the Merovingian dynasty revolves around Dagobert II, a king whose life and death gave rise to legends of hidden heirs and secret bloodlines. Unlike many of his predecessors, Dagobert II's assassination in 679 AD sparked speculation that his lineage may have survived in secret, fueling myths that persist to this day. Dagobert II ruled Austrasia, a northeastern region of the Frankish kingdom, and his reign was marked by political intrigue and factional conflict. Historical sources indicate that he was murdered, likely as part of a noble conspiracy, abruptly ending his rule. Yet rumors soon spread that he had children who were secretly protected or hidden, possibly to preserve the Merovingian sacred bloodline. These rumors were reinforced by the Merovingians' reputation for mystical authority and long-haired kingship, which lent a sense of divine importance to their lineage. According to legend, these hidden descendants were not merely surviving heirs. They were keepers of secret knowledge, spiritual authority, or mystical power, sometimes associated with the Holy Grail or other esoteric traditions. In some versions of the story, members of the bloodline were raised in secrecy by loyal supporters or monastic communities, shielded from political enemies who might have sought to eliminate all claimants. This narrative echoes broader themes in Merovingian mythology, where royal blood is sacred, potent, and worth preserving at all costs. The legend of Dagobert II's descendants also intercepts with modern conspiracy theories. Writers have suggested that his bloodline may have merged with other noble families, eventually influencing European politics or forming part of secret societies. These theories, while speculative, underscore the enduring fascination with the Merovingians as a dynasty whose power, mystique, and supposed divine lineage transcended historical reality. Archaeological and historical evidence provides little confirmation of hidden descendants. Yet the legend persists because it resonates with human fascination for lost dynasties, secret heirs, and forbidden knowledge. Dagobert II's death, combined with the Merovingians' long-standing aura of sacred kingship, created a narrative framework where the survival of the bloodline seemed not only possible, but compelling. In essence, the story of Dagobert II's hidden descendants reflects the intersection of history and myth. It illustrates how a tragic historical event, a king's assassination, can evolve into a legend of secret survival, mystical inheritance, and enduring influence.
Whether rooted in reality or imagination, this legend ensures that Dagobert II's name and the mystery of his bloodline continue to captivate historians, storytellers, and enthusiasts of Merovingian lore.
The Merovingian dynasty is often remembered not just for its political power, but for the concept of sacred kingship, the idea that the king's authority was divinely sanctioned and inherently spiritual. This belief distinguished Merovingian rulers from ordinary leaders, intertwining religion, bloodline, and political legitimacy in ways that left a lasting impact on European monarchy. At the heart of Merovingian sacred kingship was the symbolism of the long-haired king. Hair was far more than a personal feature. It was considered a visible sign of divine favor and royal authority. Cutting a king's hair, as often happened during deposition, was seen as stripping him not only of power, but of sacred legitimacy. This physical symbol reinforced the belief that the king's right to rule was inherited through blood and sanctioned by higher powers, rather than earned solely through conquest or political maneuvering. The Merovingians also drew authority from claims of semi-divine ancestry. Some chroniclers and later legends suggested that the dynasty descended from mystical beings or angels, further elevating their status above ordinary mortals. Even when these claims were more mythical than historical, they reinforced the idea that Merovingian kings were chosen by God and entrusted with maintaining order and justice across their realm. Sacred kingship affected every aspect of governance. Kings were expected to lead armies, administer justice, and protect the church, acting as mediators between the divine and the earthly world. Their decisions carried moral and spiritual weight, and their failures were often interpreted as signs of lost favor or divine displeasure. Rituals, ceremonies, and symbols, from coronations to palatial architecture, were carefully designed to manifest the sacred nature of the monarchy. Religion played a crucial role in legitimizing kingship. The conversion of Clovis I to Christianity in 496 AD marked a turning point. Kingship was now tied to the church's endorsement, adding a layer of ecclesiastical authority to the divine symbolism already associated with the bloodline. Monasteries, bishops, and priests reinforced this sacred authority, ensuring that the king's rule was seen as both political and spiritual. Sacred kingship also influenced succession and internal politics. The mystical aura surrounding Merovingian rulers elevated their children and heirs, making the preservation of the bloodline a matter of religious as well as political importance. Even when kings became do-nothing rulers later in the dynasty, the sacred symbolism of the office persisted, demonstrating the enduring power of myth, ritual, and divine association. In essence, Merovingian sacred kingship was a fusion of myth, ritual, and governance, where legitimacy stemmed from divine favor as much as from law or conquest. Kings were not merely political leaders. They were living symbols of cosmic order, spiritual authority, and dynastic continuity. This conception of rulership set the Merovingians apart from other dynasties and left a profound legacy in European ideas of monarchy, authority, and the intertwining of blood, power, and the sacred.
Beyond their crowns, armies, and palaces, the Merovingian kings were often believed to possess hidden knowledge, wisdom that transcended ordinary governance and connected them to the mystical, the sacred, and the cosmic. This secret knowledge was said to encompass rituals, symbols, and esoteric practices that reinforced their sacred authority and distinguished them from ordinary rulers. Some legends suggest that the Merovingians inherited ancient wisdom from lost civilizations, possibly through contact with the remnants of the Roman Empire, early Christian traditions, or even mystical sources. This knowledge could include astronomy, sacred geometry, or divination, guiding kings in matters of warfare,
governance, and spiritual practice. Rituals associated with the sacred kingship, such as the symbolism of the long hair, coronation ceremonies, and royal regalia, were believed to be more than ceremonial. They were practical expressions of hidden wisdom, connecting the king to divine power. Merovingian tombs and artifacts add weight to the idea of secret knowledge. Excavated graves reveal ornate jewelry, amulets, and ceremonial objects, many with symbolic patterns and inscriptions. Some historians and theorists argue that these objects were not just status symbols, but tools of spiritual or esoteric practice, designed to channel protection, divine favor, or cosmic energy. The careful placement of these items in royal burials suggests that the Merovingians valued and preserved knowledge that was considered sacred or secret. The Church both reinforced and adapted these ideas. By aligning with Merovingian kings, Christian authorities could legitimize the ruler's mystical aura while also integrating elements of pagan ritual into a Christian framework. Some scholars argue that early Christian monks and scribes may have preserved or codified esoteric knowledge, combining it with teachings of morality, kingship, and divine law. This created a dual layer of wisdom, public religious authority, and private, possibly hidden knowledge reserved for the royal line. Legends surrounding the Merovingian bloodline further emphasize secret knowledge. Stories of hidden descendants, the Holy Grail, and sacred relics suggest that certain truths were transmitted only through the royal lineage, maintained as a guarded heritage. In this context, the Merovingian king was not just a political ruler, but a custodian of mysteries, responsible for safeguarding wisdom that could shape the kingdom, its spiritual life, and even the destiny of Europe. In essence, the secret knowledge of Merovingian rulers combined ritual, symbolism, and esoteric practice to reinforce sacred authority. Whether or not these claims were fully factual, they created an aura of mystery and reverence around the dynasty. Kings were seen not only as leaders, but as keepers of cosmic and divine insight, bridging the human and spiritual realms and leaving a legacy that continues to inspire fascination, myth, and speculation today.
The Merovingian dynasty has long been linked, both historically and in legend, to early Gnostic Christianity, a spiritual current that emphasized hidden knowledge, divine wisdom, and the mystical nature of salvation. While concrete historical evidence is limited, the associations are compelling, rooted in both religious practice and later myth-making. Gnostic Christianity emerged in the 1st centuries AD as a set of beliefs that diverged from mainstream Christian teachings. Gnostics emphasized esoteric knowledge, gnosis, as the key to spiritual liberation, often portraying the material world as flawed or illusory, and the soul as trapped until it attained divine understanding. Some modern theories suggest that the Merovingians may have been influenced by or sympathetic to Gnostic ideas, especially in the context of their sacred kingship and mystical symbolism. The Merovingians' long hair, sacred bloodline, and ritual practices have been interpreted as vestiges of Gnostic influence. The idea that kings possessed divine wisdom and secret knowledge transmitted through their bloodline parallels Gnostic themes of hidden truths accessible only to a select few. In this framework, the Merovingian ruler was not just a political figure, but a spiritual intermediary, embodying divine power and maintaining cosmic order, reminiscent of Gnostic spiritual hierarchies. Some legends even suggest a connection between the Merovingians and the Holy Grail as a vessel of esoteric knowledge rather than simply a Christian relic. In this interpretation, the Grail represents not physical sustenance, but the transmission of sacred gnosis through the royal bloodline, a mystical inheritance preserved in secret from the general populace. This aligns with Gnostic ideas that salvation and wisdom are reserved for those initiated into hidden truths. The Church's rise in Merovingian Gaul also provides context.
While Orthodox Christianity became dominant, it often absorbed and reinterpreted pre-existing beliefs. Some scholars argue that monastic communities, secret teachings, and mystical practices within Merovingian society may have retained Gnostic-like elements, influencing the rituals, symbols, and myths surrounding the kings. This includes burial practices, relic veneration, and sacred iconography, which suggests an interplay between official religion and more esoteric traditions. Modern interpretations, fueled by conspiracy theories and historical speculation, amplify these connections. Works exploring the Merovingians' supposed hidden knowledge often frame them as guardians of a Gnostic legacy, blending historical fact, esoteric interpretation, and myth. Whether or not these claims are literally true, they reinforce the idea that the Merovingians occupied a space between the worldly and the spiritual, a dynasty whose authority encompassed both political power and mystical significance. In essence, the Merovingians' connection to early Gnostic Christianity reflects a broader theme, the intertwining of bloodline, sacred kingship, and hidden wisdom. Their legacy, real, symbolic, or mythical, suggests a dynasty deeply engaged with the idea that true power lies not just in rule, but in understanding the hidden truths of the universe, a concept that has captivated historians, mystics, and storytellers for centuries.
While the Merovingian kings were often seen as divinely sanctioned rulers, much of their political authority eroded over time due to the rise of the mayors of the palace, powerful officials who eventually became the true arbiters of power in the kingdom. Understanding this dynamic is crucial to seeing how the Merovingian dynasty gradually lost its grip on governance. Originally, the mayor of the palace, or major domus, was the chief officer of the royal household, responsible for administrative duties, managing estates, and organizing the royal court. In the early Merovingian period, this position was subordinate, with the king retaining ultimate authority. However, as some kings became weaker, more passive, or children when they inherited the throne, the mayors of the palace began to exercise increasing influence over military, legal, and financial matters. By the 7th century, this shift had become pronounced. Many Merovingian kings were known as the rois feignants, or do-nothing kings, more ceremonial than functional. In contrast, the mayors of the palace, such as the powerful Pipinid family, controlled taxation, army recruitment, and policy decisions, effectively running the kingdom. This concentration of power led to frequent tensions and rivalries as kings attempted to assert authority while mayors consolidated. Power struggles were often violent or politically intricate. Kings might attempt to remove or replace mayors, while ambitious mayors could orchestrate marriages, alliances, or even assassinations to secure their positions. These conflicts sometimes split the kingdom into factions, with nobles, bishops, and regional leaders taking sides. The dynamic demonstrates a critical lesson of Merovingian politics. Formal authority did not always translate into real power, and symbolic kingship could coexist with de facto administration by others. The most famous outcome of this struggle came with Pepin the Short, the mayor of the Palace of Austrasia. By 751 AD, Pepin had amassed enough power to depose the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, and secure the papal endorsement for his own kingship. This event marked the official transfer of power from the Merovingians to the Carolingians, illustrating how the office of mayor, initially a servant of the crown, had become more politically potent than the monarchy itself. Religious and social factors also played a role. Mayors often controlled alliance networks with bishops, monasteries, and nobles, giving them spiritual and material support that a weakened king could not match. This integration of secular and ecclesiastical power further eroded Merovingian authority and entrenched the mayors as the true power behind the throne. In essence, the struggle between Merovingian kings and mayors of the palace reflects a shift from symbolic to functional power,
While the kings retained ceremonial and sacred significance, the mayors held practical control over the kingdom's resources, armies, and administration. This dynamic highlights the vulnerability of a dynasty that relied on bloodline, ritual, and sacred authority, showing that even a divinely sanctioned monarchy could be eclipsed by talent, ambition, and bureaucratic skill.
In Merovingian Gaul, kings were seen as divinely sanctioned rulers, yet their authority was never entirely independent. The Christian Church emerged as a central power broker, guiding, influencing, and sometimes constraining the actions of kings. This relationship between throne and altar shaped politics, succession, and governance throughout the dynasty. The Church's influence began with Clovis I's conversion to Catholic Christianity around 496 AD. By embracing the Church, Clovis secured not only spiritual legitimacy, but also political support from bishops and clergy who were increasingly powerful players in Merovingian society. From that point forward, kings needed the Church's endorsement to consolidate rule, crown heirs, or claim divine favor, making religious authorities integral to maintaining authority. Bishops and abbots wielded considerable influence over the selection and behavior of kings. They could bless or withhold coronation, an act that symbolized approval from God and validated a ruler's claim. Kings who disregarded the Church risked losing moral legitimacy, facing rebellions, or even being excommunicated. The Church's ability to sanction or support rulers effectively made it a regulator of political power, ensuring that the Merovingians remained aligned with ecclesiastical expectations. The Church also played a critical role in legitimizing succession. Merovingian inheritance practices often divided kingdoms among multiple heirs, creating instability. Bishops could mediate disputes, endorse preferred heirs, and sometimes serve as guardians or advisors for young kings. By intertwining religious authority with political succession, the Church ensured that its interests were protected while kings remained dependent on clerical support. Beyond politics, the Church influenced daily governance and law. Monks and clerics often advised on legislation, administered justice, and supervised taxation or land grants. Religious institutions controlled vast estates and resources, giving them economic power that could rival or even surpass that of the king. In this way, the Church was not just a spiritual authority, it was a key player in the practical management of the kingdom. Conflicts occasionally arose when kings sought independence from ecclesiastical oversight. Some rulers attempted to bypass bishops, seize church lands, or make appointments without clerical approval. Yet even in rebellion, the moral authority of the Church could weaken a king's legitimacy, rallying nobles, clergy, and the populace against him. The delicate balance of power ensured that Merovingian kings were rarely fully sovereign. Their rule was always negotiated in partnership with the Church. In essence, the Church acted as both guardian and controller of Merovingian kingship. By providing spiritual legitimacy, overseeing succession, and wielding economic and moral influence, the Church ensured that kings ruled within a framework it could sanction. This relationship reinforced the fusion of sacred and temporal power that defined the Merovingian era, highlighting how even divinely chosen rulers were deeply intertwined with the ecclesiastical hierarchy. The Merovingian dynasty, often cloaked in mystique and sacred symbolism, was also a world of intrigue, betrayal, and ruthless political maneuvering. Beneath the veneer of long-haired kings and sacred authority, the courts of Merovingian Gaul were rife with assassinations, conspiracies, and power struggles, reflecting both the volatility of succession and the personal ambitions of nobles, queens, and officials. Merovingian succession laws,
which often divided kingdoms among multiple heirs, created frequent rivalries between brothers, cousins, and uncles. These divisions were fertile ground for intrigue, as ambitious nobles sought to manipulate, remove, or replace rulers to advance their own interests. Political alliances shifted constantly, and loyalty was fragile. Friends could become enemies overnight, and trusted advisors could turn on the king for personal gain. Assassination was a common tool. Historical records recount kings who were poisoned, strangled, or ambushed, often with the tacit approval or direct involvement of rival factions. For instance, the mysterious deaths of kings like Dagobert II fueled legends of secret plots and hidden heirs, underscoring how precarious life at the Merovingian court could be. Even royal family members were not immune. Siblings frequently plotted against one another to consolidate power or inherit lands. Women often operated behind the scenes, using marriages, patronage, and secret alliances to influence succession and policy, demonstrating that Merovingian politics was as much about strategy and intrigue as it was about warfare. The mayors of the palace, initially servants of the crown, also exploited these dynamics. Ambitious mayors sometimes engineered the removal or manipulation of kings, strengthening their own authority and paving the way for the eventual rise of the Carolingians. These power struggles illustrate that symbolic kingship without effective control could be exploited, making the Merovingian throne both coveted and perilous. Religion, too, intersected with court intrigue. Bishops and monasteries could serve as power brokers, endorsing certain heirs, condemning rivals, or legitimizing coups under the guise of divine approval. The perception of sacred kingship made betrayals especially dramatic, as removing a king was not merely a political act, but a symbolic challenge to divine authority, intensifying the stakes of every conspiracy. In essence, the Merovingian courts were a high-stakes arena of intrigue, where assassinations, betrayals, and strategic maneuvering shaped the fate of the dynasty. The combination of divine symbolism, fragile succession laws, ambitious nobles, and cunning royal women created an environment where power was never secure, and every ruler had to navigate a labyrinth of loyalty, deception, and mortal danger. This dark, turbulent reality beneath the legendary long-haired kings reminds us that Merovingian history was as much a tale of human ambition and treachery as it was of sacred kingship and mystique.
The transition from Merovingian to Carolingian rule marks one of the most dramatic shifts in early medieval European history. For over 2 centuries, the Merovingians had ruled the Franks, their sacred bloodline and long-haired kingship symbolizing divine authority. Yet by the mid-8th century, the real political power had shifted to the mayors of the palace, paving the way for the Carolingians to replace the once mighty dynasty. The decline of Merovingian authority was gradual. Kings had become increasingly ceremonial, earning the nickname roi finance, or do-nothing kings. They retained the sacred symbolism of rule, the long hair, the divine blessing, and the ceremonial crown, but most decisions about war, taxation, and governance were made by the mayors of the palace. This concentration of practical power in the hands of the mayors set the stage for a dynastic shift. The Carolingians, notably Charles Martel and his son Pepin the Short, were mayors of the palace who consolidated authority through military prowess, strategic marriages, and alliances with the church. Charles Martel's victory at the Battle of Tours in 732 not only defended Frankish lands from external threats, but also enhanced the prestige of the Carolingians, demonstrating that effective leadership could supersede ceremonial kingship. By 751 AD, the stage was set for a decisive transition. Pepin the Short, leveraging both his political influence and the church's endorsement, formally deposed the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, and assumed kingship himself. With papal approval, Pepin's coronation marked a legitimized dynastic replacement, transforming what had been a nominal transfer of power into a historic, sacredly sanctioned shift.
The Merovingians were not violently eradicated. They remained figures of legend and occasional political reference, but their authority was entirely eclipsed by the Carolingians. This dynastic shift reflects broader themes in medieval power. Sacred kingship, while symbolically potent, was vulnerable to practical realities, military strength, administrative skill, and church support. The Merovingians' failure to maintain effective control illustrates the fragility of symbolic authority in the absence of functional governance. The Carolingians, by contrast, combined legitimacy with action, ensuring that kingship was both sacred and practical. The Merovingian-Carolingian transition also had cultural and political consequences. It reinforced the church's role as kingmaker, strengthened centralized administration, and created a dynasty capable of expanding Frankish influence across Europe. Yet the memory of the Merovingians persisted through legends of their bloodline, sacred kingship, and secret knowledge, highlighting that even a deposed dynasty could leave an enduring imprint on history, myth, and collective imagination. In essence, the struggle between Merovingians and Carolingians illustrates the intersection of sacred tradition and political reality. It shows how dynasties rise and fall not only through divine right, but also through the exercise of power, skill, and strategic alliances, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another in medieval European history.
The Merovingian dynasty, ruling over the Frankish kingdoms from the 5th to the 8th century, was not only engaged in warfare and internal politics, but also in a complex web of diplomacy with neighboring realms. Their survival and expansion often depended as much on negotiation, marriage alliances, and tribute arrangements as on military strength. From the early reign of Clovis I, the Merovingians understood the value of diplomacy. Clovis's conversion to Christianity around 496 AD was itself a diplomatic masterstroke. By aligning with the Catholic Church, he gained support from Romanized Gaulish elites and positioned the Franks as allies of the Church, securing legitimacy among both religious and political communities. This decision also facilitated alliances with neighboring Christian kingdoms, strengthening the Frankish position in Western Europe. Marriage was a key tool of Merovingian diplomacy. Kings frequently married daughters of other noble or royal houses, creating bonds that could deter invasion, secure loyalty, or extend influence. These marriages sometimes linked the Franks to Visigoths, Burgundians, or other Germanic tribes, intertwining family networks with political strategy. Such alliances also helped integrate conquered populations, stabilizing newly acquired territories and ensuring loyalty through shared bloodlines. Diplomatic correspondence and tribute were other mechanisms for managing relations. The Merovingians negotiated treaties, tribute payments, and territorial agreements with neighboring realms such as the Saxons, Alemanni, and Lombards. These arrangements often balanced coercion with concession. A strong show of military force could accompany diplomatic negotiations, ensuring that alliances and treaties were backed by the implicit threat of war. Religion also played a diplomatic role. As Catholic rulers, Merovingian kings leveraged ecclesiastical networks to communicate with other Christian leaders, bishops, and the papacy. Religious diplomacy helped legitimize claims, mediate disputes, and even justify interventions in the affairs of neighboring kingdoms. Monastic communities sometimes acted as diplomatic intermediaries, hosting envoys and facilitating negotiations. However, diplomacy was not always peaceful. Treaties could be broken, alliances shifted, and royal marriages sometimes became flashpoints for inter-kingdom conflicts. The Merovingians' ability to navigate these complexities was crucial to their survival. Kings who failed to manage both internal factions and external relations risked destabilization, rebellion, or invasion. In essence, Merovingian diplomacy reflects a sophisticated understanding of power, influence, and strategy. Their relationships with other kingdoms were shaped by a combination of marriage, religion, tribute, and negotiation, all intertwined with the threat of military force. These diplomatic efforts complemented their sacred kingship and military campaigns, allowing the Merovingians to expand their realm,
consolidate authority, and maintain a delicate balance of power in early medieval Europe.
The Merovingian dynasty, while renowned for its sacred kingship and mystique, also built its legacy through military prowess and decisive battles. Warfare was not only a matter of territorial expansion, but also a demonstration of a king's authority, divine favor, and ability to maintain order among the Frankish tribes. Several key battles illustrate the strategic skill, ambition, and sometimes brutal reality of Merovingian rule. One of the most significant battles occurred under Clovis I, the founder of the unified Frankish kingdom. The Battle of Soissons, 486 AD, marked Clovis's consolidation of power over the remnants of Roman Gaul. Facing the Roman commander Syagrius, Clovis's victory was both military and symbolic, signaling the rise of the Franks as the dominant power in the region. This battle exemplified Clovis's ability to combine strategic alliances, surprise tactics, and leadership charisma to achieve victory. Another landmark engagement was the Battle of Tolbiac, circa 496 AD, against the Alemanni. According to legend, Clovis prayed to the Christian god before the battle, vowing conversion if granted victory. The Frankish triumph led to Clovis's baptism and the eventual Christianization of the Frankish kingdom. This battle highlights the interplay of faith, politics, and warfare, showing how military success reinforced both sacred kingship and political legitimacy. Under later Merovingians, internal conflicts were just as defining as external wars. Battles between rival kings or factions, such as the civil wars following Clothar II's reign, shaped succession and territorial control. These internal struggles were often violent and strategic, involving sieges, ambushes, and alliances with neighboring tribes. They reveal that Merovingian kingship depended as much on asserting dominance within the dynasty as on defending against outside enemies. The Battle of Vouillé, 507 AD, where Clovis defeated the Visigoths under King Alaric II, is another defining moment. This victory allowed the Franks to expand into Aquitaine, consolidating their control over southwestern Gaul. It demonstrates the Merovingians' growing military sophistication, including coordinated cavalry and infantry tactics, strategic use of terrain, and political acumen in incorporating conquered territories. Merovingian battles were also about demonstrating sacred authority. Victory was interpreted as a sign of divine favor, while defeat could undermine legitimacy. Kings led armies personally, reinforcing their role as both warriors and divinely sanctioned leaders. Success in battle strengthened internal loyalty, secured borders, and provided plunder to reward nobles and soldiers, further consolidating the king's power. In essence, the famous battles under Merovingian kings were more than military events. They were symbols of leadership, legitimacy, and divine approval. From Clovis's victories that unified the Franks to internal civil wars that tested dynastic strength, these engagements shaped the trajectory of the kingdom and cemented the Merovingians' place in European history. Warfare was thus both a practical necessity and a tool to project the sacred and temporal authority of the dynasty.
The later period of the Merovingian dynasty is often referred to as the era of the rois fainéants, or do-nothing kings. This nickname captures a curious and somewhat mysterious chapter in early medieval history, when kings retained their ceremonial status and sacred symbolism, but gradually lost real political and military power to ambitious officials, particularly the mayors of the palace. This period emerged in the 7th century, after a series of strong rulers like Clovis I and Dagobert I had unified the Franks and expanded the kingdom. Over time, several factors contributed to the decline of active kingship: fragmented inheritance practices, internal rebellions, and the growing influence of administrative officials who managed taxation, justice, and military affairs. As a result,
kings increasingly became symbolic figures, revered for their sacred bloodline and long hair, but largely removed from day-to-day governance. The title do-nothing king is somewhat misleading. While these monarchs rarely led armies or dictated policy, their role remained deeply ceremonial and spiritual. They presided over coronations, religious ceremonies, and symbolic acts that maintained the perception of divine authority. Even without practical control, the king's sacred presence was considered essential to the legitimacy of rulers, administrators, and the Frankish nobility. This unusual balance between appearance and reality makes the do-nothing kings period particularly fascinating for historians. Despite their apparent inactivity, the kings still played a role in dynastic legitimacy and social cohesion. Nobles, clergy, and foreign powers recognized the king as a symbolic center of authority. The Merovingian crown, long hair, and association with divine sanction ensured that even powerless kings were pivotal in maintaining the cultural and religious framework of Frankish society. This period also fed legends and speculation about the Merovingians. Later stories of hidden descendants, sacred bloodlines, and secret knowledge may have been inspired in part by the perceived weakness of the monarchy, suggesting that true power was often concealed behind ceremonial rituals. The contrast between symbolic kingship and actual administration created fertile ground for myths that persisted into the medieval and modern imagination. In essence, the do-nothing kings period was a time of ceremonial authority overshadowed by practical governance, highlighting the difference between sacred legitimacy and political power. It underscores the Merovingian dynasty's unique fusion of mystique, ritual, and realpolitik, and sets the stage for the eventual rise of the Carolingians, who would combine symbolic and functional authority in a new dynasty.
The Merovingian dynasty was not just a line of kings, it was a sacred institution with rulers who claimed a divinely sanctioned right to govern. This concept of divine authority underpinned their legitimacy, shaping both political structures and cultural perceptions across the Frankish kingdom. Understanding this claim to divine right is key to appreciating the dynasty's mystique and enduring influence. The foundation of this divine authority began with the belief that the Merovingians were descended from semi-divine or mystical ancestors. Some chronicles and later legends suggested that the dynasty's bloodline was blessed by supernatural forces or even descended from angels. Combined with the symbolic long hair of the kings, these elements created a potent visual and cultural signal. The king was not merely a mortal ruler, but a chosen representative of divine will on earth. Cutting a king's hair, therefore, was not just an act of humiliation, it was a symbolic severing of divine favor. Clovis I's conversion to Christianity around 496 AD reinforced the notion of divine right. By embracing the Catholic faith and receiving baptism, Clovis positioned himself as God's chosen ruler over the Franks. From that point forward, Merovingian kings were seen as both political and spiritual leaders, with their authority endorsed by the Church. Ceremonies, coronations, and blessings served to sanctify their reign, intertwining sacred ritual with secular governance. This divine right was not purely ceremonial, it had tangible political implications. Kings used the claim of divine sanction to assert authority over rebellious nobles, justify wars, and legitimize succession. Even when later kings became do-nothing rulers, the sacred symbolism of the monarchy provided a form of soft power. Nobles and subjects recognized the king's spiritual and cultural authority even when day-to-day governance was managed by mayors of the palace. The Church played a critical role in reinforcing this concept. Bishops and abbots could endorse or withhold legitimacy, effectively controlling the perception of divine right. This relationship created a feedback loop. kings needed the church's support to maintain divine legitimacy, and the church benefited from influencing political outcomes. The alliance of throne and altar thus cemented the sacred aura of Merovingian kingship. Legends of hidden bloodlines, sacred relics, and esoteric knowledge often stem or reinforce this claim to divine right. By portraying Merovingian rulers as keepers of divine wisdom, myths emphasized that their authority was both inherited and supernatural, not merely based on conquest or political skill. This dual perception of kingship, temporal and spiritual, helped the dynasty endure in memory long after its political decline.
The Merovingian period was a time of religious transition, where Christianity was spreading rapidly, but pagan traditions still held deep cultural roots. This intersection of belief systems created a fascinating phenomenon. Pagan rituals subtly integrated into or disguised as Christian ceremonies. The Merovingians, ruling at this crossroads, sometimes used these syncretic practices to maintain continuity, reinforce authority, and appeal to diverse populations. Many early Merovingian kings had been raised in a world where pagan customs, festivals, and rites of passage were central to social and political life. Even after Clovis I's conversion to Catholicism in 496 AD, the cultural inertia of paganism persisted. Rituals related to fertility, seasonal cycles, sacred kingship, and protection from evil spirits were deeply ingrained. To ensure political stability and social cohesion, these practices were often incorporated into Christian ceremonies, giving the appearance of orthodoxy while preserving older symbolic meanings. For example, coronation ceremonies often contained elements that harkened back to pagan sacred kingship. The anointing with oil, the placement of the crown, and public rituals celebrating the king's authority bore striking resemblance to older rites that symbolized cosmic order and divine favor. The king's long hair, already a symbol of sacred authority in pagan tradition, remained central, blending with Christian symbolism to legitimize rule in the eyes of both pagans and Christians. Seasonal festivals and feasts also illustrate this blending. Christian holidays like Christmas and Easter were sometimes timed to coincide with older pagan celebrations of solstices and equinoxes. Rituals involving light, fire, or water, common in pagan worship, were incorporated into Christian liturgies, appearing as harmless religious acts while preserving symbolic meanings of fertility, renewal, and protection. Merovingian elites and monastic communities played a role in this syncretism. Some monasteries and bishops tolerated or even promoted certain pagan customs to ease the population's transition to Christianity, while kings themselves sometimes endorsed ceremonies that reinforced both their sacred authority and popular legitimacy. By disguising pagan elements under a Christian veneer, Merovingian rulers could maintain continuity of ritual power while appearing fully orthodox. The blending of pagan and Christian elements also fed into later legends and conspiracies. Historians and mystics speculated that Merovingian kings possessed secret knowledge derived from older pagan practices, preserved within ostensibly Christian ceremonies. This created an aura of mystery, esotericism, and hidden wisdom, which would later inspire myths about sacred bloodlines, secret rites, and lost knowledge. In essence, the practice of disguising pagan rituals as Christian ceremonies reflects the complex cultural negotiation of early medieval Europe. The Merovingians skillfully merged sacred traditions, religious authority, and political legitimacy, ensuring that their rule remained culturally resonant, spiritually sanctioned, and socially cohesive. These syncretic practices remind us that even as Christianity became dominant, the echoes of older pagan belief systems continued to shape ritual, power, and legend in Merovingian Gaul.
The Merovingian dynasty occupies a unique place between history and legend. inspiring myths that have persisted from the Middle Ages to modern times. Beyond their documented political rule, Merovingian kings and queens were enveloped in stories of sacred bloodlines, mystical powers, and hidden knowledge, blending historical fact with folklore and medieval imagination. Medieval chroniclers often emphasized the sacred and mystical aspects of the Merovingians. Kings were depicted not merely as political rulers, but as divinely chosen figures, their long hair and ancestral lineage marking them as agents of cosmic or divine will. Over time, these features became fertile ground for myth-making, and the Merovingians were cast as guardians of secret knowledge, mystical relics, and sacred traditions. Legends frequently intertwine the Merovingians with the Holy Grail. In many medieval tales, the Grail was not merely a cup, but a symbol of the dynasty's sacred bloodline, representing divine authority, hidden wisdom, and spiritual power. The idea that the Merovingian lineage contained secrets of the divine or mystical truths reinforced the aura of mystery surrounding the dynasty, portraying them as more than historical rulers, as figures of cosmic significance. Other myths depicted the Merovingians as rulers with supernatural abilities or mysterious origins. Some stories claimed the dynasty descended from angels or sacred animals or mystical beings, granting them extraordinary authority and longevity. Such tales blurred the line between historical record and allegorical storytelling, emphasizing the divine or semi-divine nature of Merovingian kingship. Medieval chroniclers also recounted dramatic court intrigues, assassinations, and betrayals, often embellishing events to highlight moral lessons or cosmic justice. The narrative of hidden heirs, secret descendants, and lost treasures became intertwined with real political history, creating enduring myths that inspired centuries of speculation about the dynasty's secret influence long after its decline. The influence of Merovingian myths extended beyond their era. Later medieval romances, epic poems, and chronicles drew upon their mysterious aura, using the dynasty as a symbol of sacred authority, hidden knowledge, and enigmatic power. These stories contributed to the notion that European history was shaped not only by conquest and law, but also by mystery, legend, and esoteric tradition. In essence, the Merovingians in medieval legends and myths represent the fusion of history, spirituality, and imagination. They were more than kings. They became archetypes of sacred authority, mystical wisdom, and dynastic mystery, bridging the gap between the human and the divine. These narratives ensured that the Merovingian legacy endured long after the dynasty's political power faded, inspiring storytellers, historians, and mystics for centuries to come.
One of the most intriguing aspects of Merovingian lore is the alleged connection between the dynasty and angels, a motif that merges religious belief, esoteric symbolism, and legendary tradition. This connection, whether historical or mythical, helped reinforce the sacred aura of the kings, giving them an air of divine authority that transcended ordinary political rule. Some medieval chroniclers and later esoteric writers suggested that the Merovingian bloodline had mysterious, semi-divine origins, sometimes claiming descent from angelic beings or sacred intermediaries. This was not merely a fanciful tale, it reflected a broader cultural effort to sanctify rulership, portraying the kings as more than mortal and emphasizing their role as mediators between the earthly and spiritual realms. In these narratives, the king's long hair, sacred bloodline, and ceremonial acts symbolized a direct channel of divine or angelic influence, making their authority both mystical and political. Esoteric symbolism surrounding the Merovingians extended beyond genealogical claims. Sacred geometry,
ritual objects and symbolic regalia such as crowns, scepters, and ceremonial vestments were often imbued with hidden meanings and spiritual significance. Some interpretations link these symbols to celestial hierarchies, angelic guardianship, and cosmic order, suggesting that the Merovingians were not just rulers but custodians of ancient esoteric knowledge. Legends of hidden knowledge, secret descendants, and sacred relics are deeply intertwined with these angelic associations. For instance, the Holy Grail, in some mystical interpretations, is seen not only as a relic but as a conduit of divine wisdom, preserved within the Merovingian line. The idea that angels or celestial forces guided or protected the dynasty reinforced the perception that their kingship was both preordained and spiritually potent. The Church, while promoting Orthodox Christianity, sometimes absorbed or reframed these symbolic elements. Bishops and monastic scribes might interpret divine favor or miraculous events as signs of sacred kingship, subtly blending pagan, mystical, and Christian elements. This created a layered perception in which Merovingian rulers were simultaneously historical monarchs, sacred leaders, and figures of esoteric significance. In essence, the connection between the Merovingians, angels, and esoteric symbolism reflects a worldview in which power, ritual, and spiritual authority were inseparable. The dynasty was portrayed as more than a political entity. It was a living symbol of divine order, a conduit for sacred knowledge, and a bridge between the earthly realm and higher spiritual forces. These associations helped cement the dynasty's legendary status, ensuring that the Merovingians remained figures of fascination, myth, and mystical speculation long after their political decline.
Among the more modern and speculative legends surrounding the Merovingian dynasty are theories that connect the kings to UFO phenomena and ancient alien myths. While entirely outside the realm of established historical fact, these ideas reflect the enduring fascination with the dynasty's supposed mystical knowledge, sacred bloodline, and enigmatic rituals. Proponents of these theories argue that the Merovingians were more than earthly rulers. Their long hair, claimed divine ancestry, and secret knowledge are sometimes interpreted as evidence of contact with advanced beings or extraterrestrial entities. The mystical qualities attributed to the dynasty, such as prophetic insight, hidden technology, or access to sacred relics, are seen as potential signs that the Merovingians possessed knowledge beyond contemporary human understanding. The connection often focuses on the notion of a divine bloodline. Ancient alien theorists suggest that this bloodline was not purely symbolic or mythical, but literally influenced by extraterrestrial genetics or technology. Legends of hidden descendants, sacred relics, or secret rituals are interpreted as methods of preserving alien-derived knowledge, ensuring that it survived across generations. Some theories even link these ideas to the Holy Grail, claiming that it was not just a religious symbol, but a vessel of advanced knowledge or energy provided by non-human intelligences. Certain Merovingian legends about angelic descent and esoteric wisdom also feed into these modern interpretations. Angels in these theories are sometimes reimagined as extraterrestrial beings who interacted with humans, transmitting knowledge and guiding the dynasty. The symbolism of crowns, ceremonial objects, and sacred regalia is then interpreted as a coded system of esoteric or technological understanding, rather than purely religious ornamentation. While mainstream historians dismiss these connections as conspiratorial or pseudo-historical, the persistence of such myths reflect the mystique and allure of the Merovingians. The dynasty's combination of sacred kingship, secret knowledge, and enigmatic rituals provides a perfect canvas for imaginative reinterpretation.
blending medieval history with modern fascination with UFOs, alien intervention, and hidden wisdom. In essence, these theories illustrate how the Merovingians have been transformed from historical rulers into archetypes of mystery and cosmic significance. Whether interpreted through the lens of religion, esotericism, or extraterrestrial speculation, the dynasty continues to captivate the imagination, demonstrating that their legacy is as much about legend and enigma as it is about concrete historical events.
The Merovingian dynasty, shrouded in sacred symbolism and legendary mystique, was long associated with prophecies predicting the rise, fall, and hidden destiny of its kings. These prophecies, some recorded by medieval chroniclers, others preserved in esoteric or folkloric traditions, reinforced the perception that the Merovingians were not ordinary rulers, but part of a divinely guided, almost predestined lineage. Many prophecies centered on the idea of a sacred bloodline with cosmic significance. They suggested that certain Merovingian kings were destined to wield extraordinary spiritual authority, preserve hidden knowledge, or serve as intermediaries between God and humanity. In some legends, these kings were prophesied to restore divine order or reclaim a lost kingdom, while in others, the survival of the bloodline itself was seen as a symbol of hidden power and continuity. Religious figures, such as monks and bishops, often played a role in codifying or interpreting these prophecies. For example, visions or revelations attributed to saints sometimes referenced Merovingian rulers as divinely appointed agents, emphasizing that their authority was preordained and spiritually sanctioned. Such prophecies could legitimate a king's rule, warn against disobedience, or signal divine favor in times of crisis. The theme of hidden descendants frequently appears in prophetic traditions. Legends suggested that, even after the deposition of the last Merovingian king, secret heirs remained, destined to one day reclaim or influence power. These narratives inspired later medieval tales about the Holy Grail, mystical relics, and secret knowledge, framing the dynasty as custodians of both earthly and spiritual authority. Some prophecies even linked the Merovingians to apocalyptic or transformative events, implying that their line was connected to the unfolding of cosmic or divine plans. This added a layer of mystery and urgency to the dynasty's legacy, portraying the kings as not only historical rulers, but also as actors in a divine drama, whose fate and actions were entwined with the broader destiny of Europe and Christendom. In essence, the prophecies about the Merovingian line reflect a fusion of religion, legend, and political ideology. They reinforced the idea that the dynasty was sacred, their bloodline potent, and their authority divinely sanctioned. Whether interpreted as genuine predictions or later myth-making, these prophecies helped maintain the aura of mystery and power around the Merovingians, ensuring that their influence, real or symbolic, endured long after their political reign ended.
The Merovingian dynasty occupies a remarkable place in medieval historiography, appearing in chronicles, annals, hagiographies, and literary texts that blend history, legend, and moral instruction. These sources offer insight not only into the political and social life of the Merovingians, but also into how medieval writers perceived their sacred authority, mystical qualities, and dynastic legacy. Early medieval chroniclers, such as Gregory of Tours, documented the Merovingians in works like Historia Francorum. Gregory's accounts combine detailed political history with moral and religious commentary, portraying kings as both powerful and flawed, guided by divine favor yet susceptible to human weakness. Through such chronicles, readers learn about military campaigns, succession disputes, court intrigues, and alliances, but also about miraculous events and divine interventions that emphasized the sacred nature of Merovingian rule. Later medieval texts often expanded upon the legendary aspects of the dynasty.
These works depicted Merovingian kings as possessing hidden wisdom, prophetic insight, or mystical powers, sometimes linking them to sacred relics, esoteric knowledge, or divine bloodlines. Such portrayals reinforced the idea that the Merovingians were not ordinary rulers, but custodians of sacred traditions, blending historical record with allegorical meaning. Hagiographies and saints' lives frequently mention interactions with Merovingian kings, emphasizing the interplay between secular authority and ecclesiastical power. Kings are depicted seeking counsel from bishops, granting lands to monasteries, or participating in religious ceremonies, illustrating how divine legitimacy and political authority were intertwined. These accounts also highlight moments of moral instruction where kings' successes or failures were framed as reflections of their piety, reinforcing the spiritual dimension of their reign. Medieval literature also immortalized the Merovingians in mythic and symbolic forms. Chronicles, epic poems, and romances often feature the dynasty in stories about hidden descendants, sacred relics, or esoteric knowledge, blending historical events with imaginative interpretation. These texts ensured that even as Merovingian political power waned, their legendary and symbolic presence endured, influencing perceptions of kingship, sacred authority, and dynastic mystery for centuries. In essence, the Merovingians in medieval texts and chronicles serve as both historical rulers and legendary archetypes. The documentation of their deeds, combined with moral, religious, and mystical embellishments, created a layered legacy, one that informs historians about political realities while also inspiring myths, conspiracies, and fascination with sacred bloodlines and hidden wisdom. These sources reveal how the dynasty was remembered, interpreted, and reimagined, cementing its place in both history and legend.
The Merovingian dynasty, already steeped in history and legend, has captured the modern imagination through literature, film, and conspiracy-oriented pop culture, with Dan Brown's novels being among the most famous examples. In these works, the Merovingians are often portrayed as keepers of secret knowledge, hidden bloodlines, and mystical truths, bridging the gap between historical fact and speculative fiction. Dan Brown's novels popularized the idea that the Merovingians were guardians of a sacred lineage, often linked to the Holy Grail or other mystical relics. In this narrative, the dynasty's long-haired kings were not merely ceremonial rulers, but holders of secret knowledge that could alter the course of history. The stories blend historical references, medieval legend, and modern conspiracy theory, presenting the Merovingians as a dynasty whose influence extends far beyond their political reign. Pop culture portrayals often highlight the dynasty's mystique and sacred symbolism. The concept of the divine bloodline, secret descendants, and hidden rituals appears in films, TV series, and video games, reinforcing the aura of mystery surrounding the Merovingians. They are depicted as both historical figures and archetypes, embodying ideas of hidden power, esoteric wisdom, and spiritual authority. These modern interpretations draw upon medieval myths, including claims of angelic descent, esoteric symbolism, and secret kingship, blending them with contemporary fascination with conspiracy and secret societies. The Merovingians' connection to the Holy Grail, sacred relics, and hidden knowledge creates a compelling narrative that resonates with audiences intrigued by mystery, history, and the supernatural. The popularity of these portrayals has in turn influenced public perception of the dynasty. For many, the Merovingians are less a historical Frankish dynasty and more a symbol of hidden power and mystical intrigue, inspiring curiosity about bloodlines, secret societies, and ancient knowledge. Pop culture thus reinforces the idea that the Merovingians occupy a space between documented history and legend, where imagination, speculation, and historical fact intertwine. In essence, the Merovingians in Dan Brown and pop culture illustrate how history can be reinterpreted through the lens of myth and narrative, transforming kings of early medieval Gaul into enduring symbols of mystery, sacred authority, and hidden power. Their story continues to captivate modern audiences, showing that even a dynasty long removed from political relevance can remain alive in collective imagination and storytelling.
The Merovingian dynasty has long fascinated not only historians and storytellers, but also esoteric traditions and secret societies, including Freemasonry. While there is no historical evidence of direct contact between the Merovingians and Freemasonry, which emerged centuries later, the symbolic and legendary associations between the two have fueled speculation and intrigue. Freemasonry, with its emphasis on ritual, secrecy, and symbolic knowledge, often draws upon historical narratives of kings, sacred bloodlines, and mystical authority. The Merovingians, as a dynasty reputed to possess a divinely sanctioned bloodline, hidden knowledge, and sacred regalia, naturally fit into these narratives. Some Masonic-inspired theories suggest that the dynasty's esoteric traditions and secret wisdom influenced later practices of initiation, symbolism, or hierarchical organization within secret societies. Legends play a central role in this supposed connection. Merovingian kings were often described as keepers of sacred relics, mystical knowledge, or angelic wisdom, themes that resonate strongly with Masonic symbolism. Their long hair, ceremonial crowns, and sacred rituals are interpreted by some as early embodiments of principles later echoed in Masonic rites, including the veneration of hidden knowledge and the preservation of a spiritual lineage. Additionally, stories of hidden Merovingian descendants and secret dynastic bloodlines feed into Masonic mythos. Some esoteric writers suggest that these descendants safeguarded ancient knowledge, spiritual secrets, or sacred relics, passing them down through clandestine networks, a concept that mirrors Freemasonry's emphasis on initiated transmission of wisdom. While speculative, these narratives create a symbolic bridge between medieval sacred kingship and modern fraternal traditions. It's important to note that the historical Merovingians were never directly connected to Freemasonry. Instead, the dynasty's legacy was retrospectively integrated into esoteric and Masonic lore, reflecting the human tendency to link mysterious or powerful lineages to secret knowledge and ritual authority. This connection is less about factual history and more about myth-making, symbolism, and the enduring fascination with sacred dynasties. In essence, the supposed Merovingian influence on Freemasonry illustrates how legend, symbolism, and historical imagination can merge. The dynasty's mystical reputation, sacred bloodline, and ceremonial practices make them a compelling archetype for secret societies, ensuring that even centuries after their political decline, the Merovingians remain a touchstone of mystery, power, and esoteric fascination.
The Merovingian dynasty, with its long-haired kings, sacred bloodlines, and legendary rituals, has inspired centuries of fascination, and with it, a vast body of literature exploring conspiracies, secret knowledge, and hidden influence. These books range from scholarly analyses to speculative works blending history, myth, and esotericism, each attempting to uncover the hidden truth behind the dynasty's mystique. One of the earliest sources of conspiracy-oriented speculation comes from medieval chronicles and hagiographies, which, though primarily historical, sometimes hinted at secret rituals, hidden heirs, and mysterious deaths. Over time, these elements were expanded by Renaissance and Enlightenment writers who were fascinated by lost knowledge and sacred dynasties.
Texts from this period often connected the Merovingians to legends of the Holy Grail, angelic descent, or secret wisdom preserved through clandestine lineages. In modern times, books such as Holy Blood, Holy Grail, 1982, brought Merovingian conspiracies into popular consciousness. This controversial work suggests that the Merovingians were guardians of a sacred bloodline whose descendants survived secretly and influenced European history through hidden societies. The book blends historical research, legend, and speculation, offering a framework in which the dynasty's mystical reputation intersects with claims of conspiracy and secret power. Other works, often in the genre of historical mystery or esotericism, explore themes like hidden Merovingian tombs, sacred relics, and the preservation of ancient knowledge. Authors speculate about the dynasty's connection to secret societies, Freemasonry, and even modern pop culture narratives involving mystical bloodlines or divine heritage. These texts, while speculative, highlight the enduring cultural fascination with a dynasty that combined sacred symbolism with political authority. Even fictionalized works, like novels inspired by Dan Brown's narratives, draw heavily on Merovingian conspiracies. By portraying the kings as keepers of mystical secrets and hidden power, these books reinforce the idea that the dynasty's influence extends far beyond documented history, tapping into themes of mystery, secrecy, and lost knowledge that captivate contemporary audiences. In essence, books exploring Merovingian conspiracies demonstrate how history, legend, and imagination converge. Whether grounded in historical research or speculative interpretation, these works portray the Merovingians as custodians of sacred knowledge, secret bloodlines, and esoteric power, ensuring that the dynasty remains a central figure in discussions of mystery, intrigue, and conspiracy centuries after its political decline.
The concept of a mystery bloodline has become one of the most enduring aspects of Merovingian lore, linking the dynasty to modern secret societies, esoteric movements, and conspiracy narratives. According to these traditions, the Merovingians were not just rulers of the Franks, they were keepers of a sacred lineage that carried hidden knowledge, mystical authority, and perhaps even divine or supernatural traits. Modern secret societies, particularly those fascinated with esoteric wisdom, sacred geometry, and mystical heritage, often reference the Merovingians as a symbol of lineage-based authority and hidden influence. Freemasonry, Rosicrucian-inspired groups, and other mystical organizations have sometimes drawn on the mythology of the Merovingians to emphasize the continuity of secret knowledge across generations. In these narratives, the bloodline is portrayed as a living conduit of esoteric wisdom, linking ancient rulers to contemporary guardians of hidden truths. The legend frequently highlights the long-haired kings as a visible symbol of this sacred lineage. Their hair, ceremonial regalia, and purported divine ancestry are interpreted by some esoteric writers as markers of spiritual power and cosmic connection, suggesting that the Merovingian bloodline was not only noble, but sacred and potentially supernatural. Secret societies, in turn, are depicted as preserving or decoding aspects of this ancient knowledge, maintaining continuity with a lineage thought to embody both temporal authority and spiritual insight. Central to these narratives are ideas of hidden descendants and concealed influence. Stories of lost heirs, secret guardianship of relics, or clandestine knowledge echo through both historical speculation and modern myth-making. Within secret society lore, the Merovingian bloodline serves as a symbolic bridge, connecting contemporary initiates with a tradition of sacred kingship, divine sanction, and hidden wisdom that supposedly stretches back centuries.
While there is no historical evidence directly linking the Merovingians to modern secret societies, the mythology persists because it resonates with themes of power, secrecy, and spiritual legitimacy. The bloodline becomes a narrative device, a way to explore the intersection of history, legend, and esoteric thought. It embodies the idea that some knowledge and authority are preserved through lineage, hidden from the public eye and accessible only to the initiated. In essence, the Merovingian mystery bloodline in modern secret societies illustrates how history, myth, and esoteric imagination can intertwine. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, the dynasty represents the archetype of a sacred lineage, a hidden network of power, and the enduring human fascination with secret knowledge, divine ancestry, and the mysteries of ruling bloodlines.
One of the most enduring and mysterious symbols associated with the Merovingian dynasty is the long hair of its kings. In contemporary esoteric traditions, this symbol has taken on layered meanings, blending historical fact, mystical interpretation, and symbolic philosophy. Long hair is no longer seen merely as a physical trait. It represents power, spiritual authority, and connection to divine or cosmic forces. Historically, Merovingian kings were often depicted with hair that was left uncut from birth, a visible sign of their sacred status and divine favor. Cutting a king's hair was tantamount to stripping him of his authority, a ritual act that symbolized the loss of spiritual and political legitimacy. In contemporary esotericism, this concept has been extended. Hair is viewed as a channel of energy, spiritual potency, and a connection to ancestral or cosmic wisdom. Just as the Merovingians' hair symbolized their sacred kingship, long hair today can signify the preservation of hidden power or lineage-based authority. Many esoteric interpretations connect hair to subtle energy systems akin to chakras or bioenergetic networks. Long hair is believed to enhance spiritual perception, act as a conduit for mystical knowledge, and maintain a link with divine or ancestral forces. The Merovingian example is often cited as a historical precedent, showing that hair can serve as both a symbol and instrument of sacred authority. The symbolism also intersects with secret societies and mystical orders. In some modern interpretations, the long hair represents a living connection to a mystery bloodline, embodying the continuity of sacred knowledge and divine sanction across generations. Within these narratives, hair is more than personal adornment. It is a tangible marker of esoteric power, visible proof of spiritual and dynastic legitimacy. Additionally, long hair in contemporary esotericism is often associated with protection and identity. Just as the Merovingian king's hair distinguished them from ordinary people and marked them as sacred, long hair today can serve as a symbol of spiritual distinction and mystical insight, separating the initiated or enlightened from the ordinary world. In essence, the symbolism of long hair in contemporary esotericism builds directly on Merovingian precedent. It represents spiritual power, divine connection, ancestral lineage, and esoteric authority, merging historical ritual with modern mystical interpretation. The enduring fascination with Merovingian hair demonstrates how a simple physical trait can evolve into a potent symbol of hidden knowledge, sacred power, and cosmic connection. The Merovingian dynasty occupies a unique space in history where legend and reality intertwine, making it both a historical dynasty and a source of enduring myth. Separating popular myths from historical facts reveals not only the truth of their reign, but also why their legacy continues to captivate imaginations. Popular myths often portray the Merovingians as a mystical dynasty with a sacred bloodline, descended from angels or supernatural beings guarding secret knowledge and relics like the Holy Grail. Tales of hidden descendants, do-nothing kings wielding unseen power, and esoteric rituals present the dynasty as more than earthly rulers. They are depicted as custodians of divine wisdom whose influence stretches far beyond their political reign. Modern pop culture, conspiracy theories, and esoteric writings amplify these myths, blending medieval chronicles with imaginative interpretation to create a rich tapestry of intrigue and mystery. In contrast, the historical reality is more grounded. The Merovingians were a Frankish dynasty that ruled Gaul from the 5th to the 8th centuries. Kings like Clovis I and Dagobert I expanded and consolidated territories, established alliances, and converted the Frankish people to Christianity, laying the foundation for medieval European power structures. Many later Merovingian kings became do-nothing kings, only in practical government. While ceremonial and religious authority remained significant, real political and military power often rested with the mayors of the palace. The dynasty's achievements include legal codification, like Salic Law, administrative organization, and territorial expansion, rather than secret mystical dominion. Even the sacred symbolism, such as long hair or ceremonial regalia, had practical and cultural functions. Long hair distinguished kings from nobles, symbolizing their status and continuity of lineage. Ceremonial crowns and scepters reinforced authority and legitimacy rather than serving as esoteric tools. While mystical interpretations can be layered upon these artifacts, historically they were expressions of social hierarchy, divine sanction, and political order. The contrast between myth and reality illustrates how the Merovingians became fertile ground for storytelling, esotericism, and modern conspiracy theories. Myths often exaggerate, reinterpret, or mystify historical facts, turning kings and queens into archetypes of hidden power, while history provides a more nuanced understanding of their political, social, and religious roles. Recognizing this distinction allows us to appreciate both the dynasty's real impact on medieval Europe and the cultural imagination that has transformed them into legendary figures. In essence, the Merovingians' legacy is dual, as real rulers of early medieval Europe and as mythical custodians of sacred authority. Separating fact from fiction does not diminish their allure. Rather, it enriches our understanding of how history, symbolism, and legend intertwine to shape the perception of a dynasty that continues to fascinate scholars, storytellers, and enthusiasts alike.
Though the Merovingian dynasty's political power waned by the 8th century, its influence on the development of modern France is both profound and enduring. Far beyond the myths of sacred bloodlines and mystical kings, the Merovingians laid foundational structures in governance, law, and territorial organization that would shape the French state for centuries to come. The first and most enduring contribution was territorial unification. Under kings like Clovis I, the Merovingians consolidated various Frankish tribes into a cohesive kingdom stretching across Gaul. By defeating rival chieftains, Roman remnants, and neighboring tribes, they created a geopolitical framework that would serve as the basis for future French kingdoms. This unification was not merely military. It established networks of administration, vassalage, and loyalty that fostered political cohesion across diverse regions. Legal codification is another key Merovingian legacy. The dynasty formalized laws such as the Salic Law, which governed inheritance, property rights, and criminal justice among the Franks.
These legal structures influenced later medieval jurisprudence and even had a long-lasting impact on French succession laws, particularly the exclusion of women from certain inheritances, a principle referenced in royal succession debates centuries later. The Merovingians also shaped religious and cultural identity. Clovis's conversion to Christianity and his alliance with the Catholic Church strengthened the bond between throne and altar, embedding the Church as a central pillar of French governance. This fusion of political and religious authority would become a hallmark of French monarchy, reinforcing the legitimacy of rulers through divine sanction and ritual authority. Administratively, Merovingian kings established systems of counts, regional officials, and palatial centers, which created an early model of centralized governance. While later Carolingians would refine these structures, the Merovingians laid the groundwork for bureaucratic oversight, taxation, and territorial control, elements essential for the formation of a cohesive state. Even culturally, the Merovingians left a mark. By merging Roman, Frankish, and Christian traditions, they fostered a unique societal framework that influenced language, law, art, and religious practice in Gaul. Their ceremonial practices, rituals, and symbols of kingship, though often mythologized, helped define the identity and legitimacy of monarchy in what would become France. In essence, the Merovingians shaped modern France by creating a unified kingdom, codifying law, reinforcing church authority, and establishing administrative structures that endured long after their political decline. While myths and legends highlight their mystical allure, the tangible contributions of the dynasty, territorial, legal, religious, and cultural, remain a cornerstone of French history, demonstrating that even a dynasty often called do-nothing wielded influence that echoes into the present.
The Merovingian dynasty, ruling over the Frankish kingdom from the 5th to the 8th centuries, left a profound legacy that shaped the evolution of European monarchy traditions. While the dynasty eventually ceded political power to the Carolingians, the ceremonial practices, sacred symbolism, and dynastic principles established by the Merovingians influenced how European kingship would be understood for centuries. One of the most significant contributions was the idea of sacred kingship. Merovingian rulers were often depicted as divinely sanctioned, their long hair and ceremonial attire marking them as chosen by God. This intertwining of spiritual and temporal authority laid the foundation for later medieval concepts of monarchy, where kings were not merely political leaders, but also mediators between God and their subjects. This sacred aura influenced coronation rituals across Europe, inspiring ceremonies that emphasized divine approval as a core element of legitimacy. The Merovingians also influenced dynastic succession practices. The division of territories among sons, while sometimes leading to fragmentation, established the principle of hereditary monarchy, reinforcing the idea that legitimacy derived from bloodline. Later European monarchies would refine these succession laws, but the Merovingian precedent demonstrated that lineage and ancestry were central to claims of authority. The Salic Law, codified under Merovingian rule, became a cornerstone for inheritance law, particularly in France, affecting royal succession for centuries. Ceremonial symbolism introduced by the Merovingians, crowns, scepters, robes, and public rituals, also shaped European royal traditions. These symbols conveyed authority, sacred power, and continuity, teaching future monarchies that visible markers of rule could reinforce legitimacy and awe subjects. Even the idea of a king as a figurehead of national or cultural unity has roots in Merovingian practices of centralized ceremony and public display.
Moreover, the alliance of kingship with the church established during the Merovingian period influenced European monarchy for generations. By integrating religious authority into royal power, the Merovingians set a precedent in which monarchs were both political and spiritual leaders, a model that persisted through the medieval period and shaped interactions between kings, popes, and nobles. In essence, the Merovingians contributed to European monarchy by defining sacred kingship, establishing hereditary succession, codifying ceremonial symbols, and integrating religious authority. Their practices became templates that later dynasties adapted and refined, ensuring that the Merovingians' influence extended far beyond their political lifespan. Through both tangible law and intangible symbolism, they helped shape the very concept of monarchy in medieval and early modern Europe.
The Merovingian dynasty, though largely shrouded in legend, has left tangible traces that archaeology continues to uncover, revealing insights into their political power, culture, and daily life. Excavations across France, Germany, and Belgium have uncovered tombs, artifacts, and settlements that shed light on the material and ceremonial world of this early medieval dynasty. One of the most significant types of discoveries is royal and elite burial sites. Merovingian tombs, often richly furnished, have revealed jewelry, weapons, ceremonial objects, and textiles, providing evidence of both wealth and social hierarchy. Graves of kings and queens were frequently marked by long hair preserved in burial or symbolic arrangements, emphasizing the sacred kingship central to Merovingian ideology. Such burials also illustrate ritual practices, showing how funerary customs combined pagan and Christian elements, reflecting the transitional religious landscape of the time. Merovingian artifacts offer further insight into their culture and symbolism. Ornate jewelry, fibulae, brooches, and ceremonial swords demonstrate the dynasty's craftsmanship, wealth, and symbolic sophistication. Many of these items feature geometric patterns, animal motifs, and Christian iconography, highlighting a blend of cultural influences and the use of material objects to convey power, legitimacy, and divine favor. Archaeologists have also uncovered palatial sites and fortifications, shedding light on the political and administrative structures of Merovingian rule. These sites reveal layouts for residential, ceremonial, and defensive purposes, helping historians understand how the kings managed territories, hosted courts, and projected authority across the kingdom. Some sites also show evidence of early Christian churches and monastic communities, underscoring the dynasty's role in the spread of Christianity. Additionally, coins and inscriptions from the Merovingian period provide evidence of economic activity, trade networks, and royal propaganda. Coins bearing kings' likenesses or symbolic motifs were both functional and emblematic, reinforcing legitimacy and sacred authority while circulating the image of the dynasty across its realm. Collectively, these archaeological discoveries illustrate a dynasty that was wealthy, ritualistically sophisticated, and politically organized. While myths and legends have immortalized the Merovingians as mystical rulers with hidden knowledge, material evidence anchors their story in historical reality, showing the tangible ways in which they exerted power, displayed status, and navigated the complex interplay of pagan tradition and emerging Christian authority. In essence, archaeology transforms the Merovingians from legendary figures into a vivid historical presence, providing concrete evidence of their influence, culture, and enduring legacy in early medieval Europe.
The Merovingian dynasty, while often shrouded in legend,
has left behind a wealth of artifacts and relics that survive in modern museums, offering a tangible connection to the rulers of early medieval Gaul. These relics, ranging from ceremonial objects to everyday items, allow historians, archaeologists, and the public to experience the material culture, artistry, and symbolism of the Merovingians. One of the most striking types of relics are jewelry and personal adornments. Elaborate brooches, fibulae, and necklaces, often made of gold, garnet, or precious stones, reveal not only the wealth and status of the elite, but also their symbolic sophistication. Many pieces feature intricate geometric patterns, animal motifs, and early Christian symbols, reflecting the cultural and religious fusion that defined the Merovingian era. Museums such as the Musée du Louvre and the Musée de Cluny in Paris house remarkable examples, providing insight into both fashion and ceremonial significance. Weapons and ceremonial objects are also prominent among Merovingian collections. Ornate swords, daggers, and scepters, often richly decorated, were not only practical tools of war, but also symbols of authority and sacred kingship. The ceremonial use of such items highlights the role of ritual in legitimizing royal power, connecting physical artifacts to the mythology of divine rule. Coins from the Merovingian period, preserved in institutions like the British Museum and La Bibliothèque Nationale de France, provide additional historical insight. Bearing images of kings, symbolic motifs, or inscriptions, these coins were instruments of political propaganda, economic exchange, and dynastic representation, allowing rulers to extend their influence across their territories. Some museums also display fragments of textiles, religious relics, and everyday objects excavated from Merovingian sites. These items reveal details of daily life, monastic influence, and funerary customs, illustrating how sacred and secular elements intertwined in Merovingian society. Such relics offer a more nuanced understanding of the dynasty beyond legends of mystical bloodlines, grounding their story in concrete historical reality. In essence, Merovingian relics and museums today serve as tangible bridges between past and present, connecting modern audiences with a dynasty that shaped early medieval Europe. They showcase the artistry, ritual, and political symbolism of the era, offering both historical insight and a sense of the enduring mystique that has surrounded the Merovingians for centuries.
The Merovingian dynasty played a pivotal role in shaping early medieval legal traditions, leaving a lasting impact on the development of European law. While often remembered for their long hair and sacred kingship, the Merovingians were also innovators in codifying rules, regulating society, and integrating Roman, Frankish, and Christian legal principles. One of their most enduring contributions was the codification of the Salic Law, a legal code that governed the Franks and influenced European succession and property practices for centuries. Originally compiled under Clovis I and later expanded, the Salic Law addressed issues such as inheritance, compensation for crimes, social hierarchy, and territorial rights. It established clear rules for the division of property among heirs and regulated the conduct of nobility, providing a foundation for legal consistency in a fragmented post-Roman world. Merovingian kings also used law as a tool for political consolidation and social control. By standardizing rules across their territories, they could reinforce royal authority, mediate disputes, and legitimize rulership. The legal framework also reflected a blending of pagan customs and emerging Christian norms, illustrating how the Merovingians navigated cultural and religious transition while maintaining social cohesion. In addition to codification, Merovingian kings exercised judicial authority directly, presiding over courts, adjudicating disputes, and issuing edicts. This reinforced the notion of the king as a guardian of justice and divine order, a principle that would resonate through medieval Europe.
Their involvement in legal matters emphasized the integration of monarchy and law, establishing a model in which rulers were responsible for both governance and societal regulation. The influence of Merovingian law extended well beyond their political decline. Concepts like hereditary succession, compensatory justice, and codified social hierarchies persisted into Carolingian and later medieval legal systems, shaping the evolution of feudal law and royal prerogative. Even modern interpretations of European inheritance law trace conceptual roots back to Merovingian innovations.
The Merovingian dynasty, though ruling in the early medieval period, left an architectural legacy that influenced the development of French structures for centuries. While few monumental buildings survive intact, archaeological evidence and later adaptations reveal how Merovingian designs blended Roman, Germanic, and early Christian styles, laying the groundwork for medieval architectural traditions. One of the most notable contributions was the development of royal palaces and fortified centers. Merovingian kings built palatial complexes not only for residence, but also as administrative and ceremonial hubs. These structures typically featured wooden frameworks, stone foundations, and simple basilica-styled chapels, reflecting a combination of practical construction and symbolic authority. Palaces were often situated strategically near rivers or crossroads, emphasizing both defense and control over trade and communication routes. Religious architecture under the Merovingians also left a lasting mark. The dynasty was instrumental in the construction of early Christian churches and monastic centers. These buildings often incorporated Roman basilica layouts, intricate mosaics, and symbolic decorative elements, blending pagan motifs with Christian iconography. Monasteries in particular became centers of learning, artistic production, and spiritual authority, shaping the cultural and religious landscape of France for centuries. Merovingian funerary architecture, visible in burial chapels and tomb constructions, reflects both ritual practice and social hierarchy. Richly furnished tombs with stone markers, crypts, and sarcophagi illustrate an attention to sacred space and dynastic commemoration, influencing later Carolingian and medieval ecclesiastical designs. The emphasis on visibility and symbolism in these structures underscored the connection between architectural form, political power, and religious authority. Even though the Merovingian style was relatively simple compared to later Gothic or Romanesque architecture, it established foundational principles: integration of sacred and secular spaces, attention to ritual and symbolism, and the adaptation of Roman and Germanic building traditions. Later medieval architects built upon these concepts, evolving into more elaborate structures while retaining the Merovingian emphasis on authority, spiritual significance, and functional design. In essence, Merovingian-inspired architecture represents the fusion of practicality, symbolism, and religious expression. Through palaces, churches, monasteries, and tombs, the dynasty left a tangible imprint on the French landscape, demonstrating that even in an era often overshadowed by legend, the Merovingians contributed meaningfully to the evolution of architecture and the shaping of early medieval French society. The Merovingian dynasty, ruling the Franks from the 5th to the 8th centuries, remains a subject of fascination for both historians and conspiracy theorists. This enduring interest stems from a unique combination of historical impact, legendary mystique, and alleged hidden knowledge that has kept the dynasty alive in collective imagination long after their political decline. For historians, the Merovingians are captivating because they were pioneers in shaping early medieval Europe. Kings like Clovis I consolidated the Frankish tribes, established legal frameworks such as the Salic Law, and allied closely with the Church, setting precedents for European monarchy, governance, and Christianization. Archaeological discoveries, from richly furnished tombs to ceremonial regalia, provide tangible evidence of their wealth, political authority, and cultural sophistication. Studying the Merovingians offers historians insight into the formation of early European states, legal traditions, and religious institutions, making them a key subject for understanding the foundations of modern Europe. Conspiracy theorists and enthusiasts, meanwhile, are drawn to the mystical and legendary aspects of the Merovingians. Tales of long-haired kings, sacred bloodlines, hidden descendants, and secret knowledge create a narrative in which the dynasty is not just historical, but also esoteric. Stories linking the Merovingians to the Holy Grail, angelic descent, and modern secret societies suggest that their influence extends beyond mere politics into the realms of mystery, hidden power, and spiritual authority. The notion of a mystery bloodline preserved through clandestine means fuels speculation about the persistence of secret knowledge and unseen influence across centuries. Pop culture has amplified this fascination. Novels, films, and television shows, most famously works inspired by Dan Brown, have depicted the Merovingians as guardians of sacred secrets and mystical relics, blurring the line between history and fiction. This modern reinterpretation reinforces both their legendary allure and the idea that history itself may conceal hidden truths, encouraging further speculation and engagement with the dynasty's myths. Ultimately, the Merovingian legacy captivates because it sits at the intersection of fact and legend. For historians, it offers concrete insights into early medieval society, law, and monarchy. For conspiracy theorists and the popular imagination, it represents the archetype of a sacred, secretive dynasty whose influence may reach beyond the visible layers of history. The blend of verifiable achievements and enduring mystery ensures that the Merovingians remain an endlessly intriguing dynasty, inspiring both scholarly inquiry and imaginative speculation centuries after their political reign ended.